Us for artificial intelligence in the behavioral health professions, ethical and risk management challenges with Dr. Frederic Reamer. Dr. Reamer?
Thank you, Mary and Alejandra. Thank you for your efforts behind the scenes there. And good morning to all of you. Um, so I was thinking a few days ago about the first time I was invited to lecture in Idaho. I've lectured in Idaho a number of times at the VA, with which some of you may be familiar in Boise, several events at the Grove Hotel in Boise, got to spend a little bit of time in the Sawtooth Mountains, and very fond memories of my time there. Today, through the wonders of modern technology, I'm coming to you from the East Coast, from Rhode Island, which is where I live and work. And I was thinking about how when I first lectured in Idaho, a tweet was the sound a bird made. Full stop. I didn't talk at all about Twitter, now called X, and how some behavioral health practitioners are using X to post information for their clients, for the public. When I first lectured in Idaho some years ago, TikTok was the sound a clock made. Full stop. It was not a smartphone app that some clinicians are using to post information for clients and the general public. When I first lectured in Idaho, the cloud was the white fluffy thing in the sky over the Sawtooth Mountains and Coeur d'Alene and Nampa, etc. Not where many of you, no doubt, are storing your electronic health and medical records. The world has changed. And I suspect when I have visited Idaho to lecture over the years, I may have used the word artificial, as in, anybody have any sweet and low around here for coffee? Artificial sweetener. And I may have used the word intelligence, as in, that's a good attribute for a behavioral health practitioner to have. But I did not link those two words together during any of my presentations in Idaho. Artificial intelligence. Whoever could have imagined that we would now be having a continuing education webinar with those words in the title? But here we are. I didn't see it coming. I suspect you didn't see it coming. And here we are. And the tube of toothpaste, some of that toothpaste is already squeezed out. We're not getting it back in my opinion. To use a different metaphor, this bell has been rung. I don't think we're going to unring a bell. I don't know how to unring a bell. I think artificial intelligence is here to stay. This is my prediction. I could be wrong, but this is my prediction. By the time we log off today, some of you, I'm going to guess there are going to be three groups here. Some of you are going to be rather enthusiastic about the possibility of using artificial intelligence in your work. Maybe some of you are already using it, and you are proponents. Maybe with, some concerns, but you're proponents. Others of you may log off today thinking, no way in the world am I going to be using any of these tools. No way in the world am I going to be using any of these tools. And if that is your opinion, that's fine. I'm not here to try to persuade you that artificial intelligence is a wonderful thing, that all behavioral health practitioners ought to use. I mean, that's up to you to decide. But my opinion is, even if you log off today thinking to yourself, I'm not using any of this stuff. None of it. It's just not what I signed up for when I became a behavioral health practitioner. I think all of us have to know what I'm going to cover today. We need to know how some clients are using artificial intelligence, some of them without our knowledge, how members of the general public, including potential clients, are using artificial intelligence. We need to know what's out there. Because more and more, we're going to have clients who report to us in clinical sessions that they've gotten information from AI, they've accessed resources using AI, and we need to know about their relative strengths and their limitations. And then I think there may be a third group here today. You're all familiar with the word ambidexterity. On the one hand, on the other hand, I predict that some of you are going to log off today thinking, well, I think there are some aspects of AI that actually might be quite useful and they're quite appealing in my work as a behavioral health practitioner, as a mental health counselor, psychologist, psychiatrist, social worker, marriage and family therapist, substance use disorder treatment professional, whatever you are, psychiatric nurse. And at the same time, you may have some serious, significant, profound concerns about these tools. On the one hand, on the other hand. That's the pattern that I'm seeing. And we'll see if I'm right. I don't want to bore you with biographical detail, but it is relevant to today's presentation. So, as it says right here, I'm on the faculty at the School of Social Work, the Graduate School of Social Work at Rhode Island College, which is in Providence, Rhode Island. Feel free to say hello if you ever swing by Rhode Island. It's a lovely place to visit, especially in the summer, fall, late spring. Been on the faculty here since 1983. It's a long time. And when I joined the faculty here to help build the graduate program in the early 1980s, I couldn't have talked about any of these issues, none of these issues. Ethical issues, risk management issues evolved. And so here we are. I did not become a social worker many years ago in order to focus on ethical and risk management issues, but in fact, I have now spent decades of my career focusing on these issues. I became a social worker because of my passionate interest in criminal justice, crime prevention. I've worked in federal and state prisons for 27 years of my career in a variety of capacities. And it was in a federal prison many years ago when I encountered my first ethical dilemma with work I was doing with an inmate serving a long sentence who shared with me the fact that he was in a protracted dispute with another inmate, which often happens in prison. People sometimes don't get along. And it was my opinion that my client, the inmate, might assault the other inmate with what's called a slock. A slock, if you've never worked in a prison, is the term we use for a lock inside a sock that you can swing around and bash somebody in the head, not pleasant. A slock. And I had to make a decision about whether the information that inmate shared with me, air quotes, confidentially, was confidential. And that's how I ended up going down this rabbit hole, wrestling with complex issues around confidentiality exceptions and managing boundary and dual relationships. If you live and work in rural Idaho, which is almost redundant rural Idaho, right? For most of you, that's a redundancy. Not a question of if you bump into clients at the food store or your kids are classmates in the 1/3 grade in town, or you're in recovery and you go to the 12-step meeting in your community and there's a new client. We know these things happen. Decisions we make about whether to be vague or detailed in our clinical notes, given who might have access to them down the road. I've now spent much of my career wrestling with these complex ethical issues. For the social workers in the crowd today, I imagine we have some social workers. I was privileged to have chaired the national task force that wrote the code of ethics for the social work profession that's in force right now, with some more recent additions related to technology, which we'll be discussing today. So focusing on ethical and risk management issues has been an enormous part of my professional life. And during the last year and a half or so, I've been focusing on issues related to artificial intelligence. Again, I didn't see any of this coming. So, when some of us started our careers, we were using things like this. Anybody old enough to remember these things? May they rest in peace. They're like Smithsonian artifacts, right? Or some of you may be of a certain age where you actually typed your high school or college papers on a typewriter. Imagine that. I'm old enough to remember when the IBM Selectric was invented with the little rotating ball, and you could plug the thing in, and it was fast and had correction tape, and it was like a gift from the heavens. Now, of course, it's a dinosaur. And I remember doing my PhD dissertation at the University of Chicago, sitting at machines, key punch machines, entering all my data on these cards. I had to schlep boxes of these cards across campus. It was Chicago, February, wind chill -14 kind of thing. And now, of course, we have our warm computer labs where I teach my graduate students statistics, which of course they love, favorite course, statistics. And they complain, and I have to tell them, well, when I was your age, I had to schlep across campus. We didn't have warm labs. Some of you are old enough to remember the first mobile phones. Oh my goodness. You needed like a bag to carry that thing around, right? There's the key punch machine I had to use when I entered data on those cards. Oh my gosh. And then about a year and a half ago, I started to think real seriously about today's topic. This is an article I published in an academic journal, Artificial Intelligence in Social Work. And everything I say in this article applies to the other behavioral health professions, emerging ethical issues. This was the front end of my thinking a year and a half ago, and my thinking has already moved beyond some of what I say in this article. That's how fast this is moving. So this is a screenshot of an article from a National Association of Social Workers publication on the emergence of artificial intelligence in the profession, and I shared some of my thoughts in this article. And last week, my newest book was released with the title of Artificial Intelligence in the Behavioral Health Professions, Ethical and Risk Management Issues. If somebody had told me the first time I lectured in Idaho that in 2025, I would publish a book on artificial intelligence in the behavioral health professions, what I would have said to my audience in Boise is, what's artificial intelligence? What? But here we are, enough to fill a book. So for those of you not familiar with the history, and why would you be? Artificial intelligence, the term has actually been around for over a half century. A Stanford University professor by the name of John McCarthy introduced the term, but it's only found its way into behavioral health relatively recently. So, what is it? I assume all of you have a general sense. In behavioral health care, AI, artificial intelligence, combines computer science and data sets to simulate human intelligence, like therapists, caseworkers, to enable problem solving in a variety of contexts. Clinical, which is what I suspect most of you are interested in. Some of you may be administrators and supervisors, so you're interested perhaps in the use of AI in your roles as administrators and supervisors. Some of you may be concerned about healthcare policy, behavioral healthcare policy in Idaho or at the national level. AI is being used to address those issues. It uses, and there's a lot of jargon here, some of which you've probably heard, machine learning. What the heck is machine learning? That's when, for example, our clients provide what's called generative data. So it's, in other words, this is not a Google search. This is generative data where our clients or members of the general public are sharing information with an AI tool about their mood related challenges, their anxiety, their relationship conflicts, their efforts in recovery. And the AI tool uses that information to notice, identify patterns in the client's or user's entries, machine learning. And the AI tools use this data, historical data, built up over time, to predict and shape new output. It's very, very dynamic in a way that a typical Google search is not. Google searches are primitive compared to the information people get when they use these AI tools, and I'll share some of them with you shortly. More jargon, the second bullet point. AI can take the form of expert systems, natural language processing, NLP, speech recognition, machine vision. This is language that we use when we talk about AI. There's no way to avoid it. And AI depends on algorithms, the third bullet point. That term shows up repeatedly in any serious discussion of AI, algorithms that these AI platforms use to enhance machine learning and reasoning, self-correction, the AI tool corrects itself, and to enhance creativity. And here's my opinion. And by the way, feel free during our Q&A opportunities, which we'll have today, feel free to share opinions that may be different from mine. I'm just going to share with you what I think's going on, what I think the potential advantages and disadvantages are associated with AI, but you may have a different point of view. I believe in the free exchange of idea, go for it. My view, the fourth bullet point, I think AI truly has the potential to transform, and I don't use that word lightly, transform behavioral healthcare and enhance our ability to serve clients and the organizations with which we work, the communities that we serve. It can be used, as I said, in clinical contexts, administrative, advocacy, policy contexts, in behavioral health. AI can help us analyze data remarkably quickly in ways that lead to, I think, enhanced services and interventions for people who struggle in life. And that's the upside. But as you'll see shortly, I also think there are actual and potential downsides. I'm not here to sugarcoat any of this. I'm not here to try to convince you that you ought to be using AI. I'm here to provide what I think is an honest, candid assessment of where we are, the good news, if you will, and the challenging news. Now, AI currently is being used in a variety of ways. And I will show you some examples momentarily. But let me just go over this conceptually before I show you some examples. Number one, AI is being used by many behavioral health organizations and practitioners, including people in private or independent practice, which I suspect some of you are in, to provide clients, members of the general public, with opportunities to engage in clinical exchanges using chatbots, using what we call predictive analytic tools, AI generated avatars. What's an avatar? It's a graphic representation. The clinician can be an avatar. The client can be an avatar. It's almost like, for those of you old enough to remember Barbie and Ken dolls, anybody old enough to remember Barbie and Ken dolls? You could decide, oh, what kind of outfit and what kind of hair color and all that. Well, there are AI tools being used in behavioral health where clients get to decide how tall they want to be, what they want to wear, what kind of hair color, and they use those avatars to interact with their clinicians. And some of the clinicians are avatars. They're not real people. I'll show you examples momentarily. The second bullet point, client self-monitoring. I will share with you some AI tools that clients and members of the general public, potential clients, are using to monitor their moods, monitor their behaviors using smartphone apps driven by AI, wearable sensors, again, chatbots, client surveillance. I don't know if you are familiar with the fact that a number of human service behavioral health organizations are using AI to monitor clients' locations. As I said, I've spent much of my career working in criminal justice and corrections. I spent 24 years on my state's parole board. We were keenly interested in knowing where parolees are located, how they're doing. Some of these agencies are now using AI to monitor clients' locations, their mental health status, their stress levels, how they're coping. Many of these use chatbots with, ever heard the term gamification? Talk about jargon. Ever heard the term gamification? What's gamification? Where clients who are using AI tools in conjunction with behavioral health services receive incentives through the AI tool if they go to 12-step meetings, if they reach their goals. These are incentives that they can cash in, so to speak. The fourth bullet point. How many of you have heard the term ecological momentary assessment? Try saying that 3 times fast with a saltine in your mouth. Ecological momentary assessment, EMA. What's that? Behavioral health practitioners and agencies using AI to repeatedly sample clients' behaviors, their experiences in real time, synchronously. You may know that term now, synchronously, meaning in real time. And because it's generative AI, generative, when clients share information about feeling now, their moods now, their behaviors now, the AI tool is constantly updating the data for that client and responding based on the historical data. Social robots. How many of you have seen social robots being used in behavioral health settings? I have. Recently, I was lecturing in Japan. I've lectured in Japan multiple times. I visited a memory unit, a geri psych unit, a geri psych, geriatric psychiatry, locked unit in Tokyo, where there was a social robot. And the social robot resembled a human being, right? It was life size, and it got to know the residents of this geri psych unit. It knew them by name. It knew what kinds of jokes they like, what kinds of stories they like to hear. The social robot had the ability to say to a resident, I know you love to dance. Would you like to dance? And the social robot knows what kind of music that particular resident prefers. The social robot can say to the resident in the geriatric psychiatry unit, you just got a text message from your daughter. Would you like me to read it to you? And would you like to respond? And all of this is using AI. Data mining, the next bullet point. What's that? That's the use of an AI tool to extract potentially useful information from data to identify patterns and trends using, again, the jargon, learning algorithms. If you have a client with persistent and chronic mental illness who has the ability to use an AI tool, the AI tool will mine the data for that client's pattern of symptoms. And the AI tool might suggest self-care options, might conduct a risk assessment, might even forecast treatment outcomes for the clinician. And that's related to the next bullet point, algorithmic forecasting. That's using risk-related data from multiple sources to predict outcomes. And this is being used right now by some public child welfare agencies, parole and probation offices. There is a prominent public child welfare agency, the kind of agency that receives mandated reports, suspected child abuse and neglect suspected of older adults, people with disabilities, using AI to screen the calls and then to recommend to the staff, is this low risk, moderate risk, high risk? Should we conduct a full-blown investigation? Algorithmic forecasting in protective services. AI that's being used to populate content in behavioral health settings. So for those of you who have administrative roles, management roles, you've got to, complete grant applications for funding purposes, conduct needs assessments, program evaluations, generate final reports to funders. Maybe you're organizing advocacy and social justice campaigns. Well, I can tell you for a fact that many behavioral professionals who are in those roles are using AI to populate the content, saving them mountains of time. Clinical notes. How many of you would say, if you're being candid, when you think about the work you do in behavioral health, crisis intervention services, counseling individuals, couples, families, groups, working in substance use disorder treatment programs, whatever you do, how many of you would say, if you were to rank order from top to bottom, what you like about the work you do and what you don't particularly enjoy, you would say documentation is at the bottom of the list of fun things to do or close to the bottom of the list. And in my experience, most behavioral practitioners in Idaho and elsewhere put documentation at the bottom of the list or close to the bottom of the list. And I get that. Time consuming, tedious. If you're in private practice, typically it's uncompensated. I get it. It's a drag. Essential, but a drag. I will show you shortly several AI tools that a growing number of behavioral health practitioners are using that create their clinical notes, that create their clinical notes using machine learning tools, AI tools, what are called speech to text tools. Then I'm going to share my thoughts about the potential advantages of using these AI tools and what I think are some significant risks.
Dr. Reamer,
Mm-hmm.
there is a question in the chat, and it was when you were talking about probation. And the
Yeah.
question is it legal for probation to monitor clients in such a way, or is there some sort of release form that clients have to sign?
Yeah. So in the settings in which it's being used, and it's not widespread, great question. It has to be, in my opinion, with full disclosure. The client has to acknowledge this. Now, because they're on probation or because they're on parole, they may not have a choice. They may not have a choice because they lose some of their, as we say, liberty interests. But that said, in my opinion, ethically, it must be with full disclosure. Must be with full disclosure. Okay, so clinical notes, AI tools for clinical notes. Then the next bullet point, quality control and clinician feedback. Some of you, perhaps, are supervisors, clinical supervisors. You may be supervising graduate students who are completing internships. You may be supervising staff, whatever your role is as a supervisor. And you meet with supervisees an hour a week or whatever it is, and you provide them with feedback. I'm going to show you an AI tool that a growing number of behavioral health practitioners are using to provide feedback, granular, detailed feedback to supervisees about the work they're doing, what's going well, what they need to work on, very granular, very nuanced feedback. And this AI tool is designed specifically for supervision purposes. Some of you may be involved in clinical or program evaluation research. I know behavioral health practitioners who are using AI tools to identify relevant evidence-based literature regarding, state-of-the-art interventions using, CBT or DBT or EMDR or solution-focused therapy or narrative therapy or whatever it happens to be. And they want to keep up with best practices, and they're using AI tools to do that. And finally, on this slide, professional education, agency-based training. So I'm an educator. I'm now using AI. A number of my colleagues are using AI to provide students with AI-based simulations so they can practice what it's like to provide crisis intervention services to people living on the street in Boise, Idaho, who struggle with psychiatric illness and who don't want to go to a shelter, using virtual reality, AI-based. As a professor, I use AI tools to be sure that my graduate students are not plagiarizing, right? That's a huge risk these days. Copying and pasting from the internet, right? AI tools detect plagiarism. I've worked with practitioners and some students who struggle with disabilities, right? It could be visual, auditory, other physical disabilities. There are some fabulous AI tools out there that can assist them in their endeavors. So before we go on and focus especially on the ethical and risk management issues, let me show you some examples. And I want to clarify what I'm showing you now. These are examples for educational and informational purposes. I want to be clear. These are not endorsements. I'm not endorsing anything today. These are examples. And up to you to decide whether you find these appealing or not. So this is Woebot Health. Woebot. Woe, like woe is me, get it? Bot, like chatbot. Quote, mental health needs have multiplied, support hasn't. Our mission, I'm right down here, is to make mental health support radically accessible by building the future of chat-based AI wellness tools. Right. Allison Darcy, who helped develop this, was featured not too long ago in 60 Minutes, describing why she thinks it's necessary to provide the general public with AI tools to help them. as they cope with the challenges in life. This next one, which should come up momentarily, is WISA, W-Y-S-A. WISA, mental health redefined. Notice it says completely anonymous, no stigma, no limits, right? Accessible mental health support for everyone anytime. So, that's great. People who are having a panic attack at 2:20 in the morning can get help on WISA, completely anonymous. But think about the ethics and risk management. Suppose that individual is communicating some suicidal ideation. Well, what's the AI tool supposed to do? There's no human being reading those comments. Does the AI tool need to have what's called an escalation protocol to refer that individual to a human being if there's evidence that the AI tool user is engaging in suicidal ideation? But it's anonymous. So how exactly do you do that? Here's another example. This one is called Elomia Health. The artificial intelligence that works like a therapist. Notice the content on the right-hand side. I'm so overwhelmed trying to get everything done. Every new task feels like a punishment. I no longer have any motivation. Response: I'm sorry you're going through this. Empathy. And then some suggestions. Here's another one. I can't stop crying. My friend had a birthday party, didn't invite me. Everyone we know was there except for me. That sounds so rough. The empathic response, not from a human being, that's AI. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Let's take a few breaths together to help you relax. Close your eyes. Self-care. Sometimes it feels like I'm never going to get out of this cycle. Let's try to make your schedule. Get the idea? This is Elomia Health. How about this one? This is Pix Health, PYX. What's Pix Health? It focuses specifically on issues related to loneliness. It's designed for people who are struggling with loneliness. And I'm going to play a little video here. And Mary, let me know if you don't hear it, but you should. Give it a moment to load.
Pix Health actually reached out to me through my insurance to see if it was something I'd be interested in trying. It has helped a lot because I didn't know that I had all the resources until Pix came around.
The Pix app allows you to do self-care in your way and at your pace and in your time.
My Andy has become somebody that is in a sense a bridge point between my therapy appointments. She gives me a call and is, somebody who will actually sit down and help me come up with a solution instead of letting me sit in a problem.
We just talk about what's going on and how I lost my cat and then got a kitten, and she makes sure I got everything and getting rides and food.
She helped me during my hardest time. I was in a big depression. I wasn't really taking my medicine at the time, and she stuck through me, and she was a really big help.
I know that I've gotten this far in the last 6 months, and in my opinion, it's further than I would have gotten without Pix Health.
You get the idea. Let me show you a few more so you understand what's out there that some of your clients and members of the general public who are not your clients but could become your clients are using. Here's one called Youper, Y-O-U-P-E-R. Your emotional health assistant, safe, private, and clinically validated. Artificial intelligence used by over 2.5 million people to support their mental health. Then we have, and I could show you many more. These are some of the better examples, I think. This is EarKick, right? So, EarKick. I can start a new chat with this cute little panda, right? And I can type at the bottom, I got up this morning feeling really, really blue. I'm not sure I know what to do to deal with my anxiety. Okay. And I click the little arrow, and within seconds, I get an empathic response. I'm really sorry to hear that you're feeling so blue this morning. It's tough when anxiety creeps in like that. Can you tell me more about what you're experiencing? What thoughts or feelings are coming up for you right now? That seems like a pretty reasonable response from a therapist. That's in real time, folks. That's in real time. Here is LEQ. So I mentioned to you that I've seen social robots in a variety of settings, most recently in Tokyo on a Jerry Psych unit. And then there's a version of it called LEQ, which, unlike some of them, doesn't look like a human being, but provides supports for people who may be struggling. And let me see if I can very quickly have you meet LEQ. Give me a second here to pull this up. And I should be able to, somewhere in here, get access to a little video. If it, maybe they changed their website, but they used to have a video right here. Anyway, if it doesn't come up, that's fine. LEQ uses artificial intelligence to interact with users, including people with mental health issues, right? In the ways that I described earlier. Okay, so maybe they took the video down, but anyway, you get the idea. Then I mentioned that many behavioral health practitioners, I think an increasing number, particularly people who are not fond of documentation, are using AI software to generate their clinical notes. This is one example called Mentalic. Mentalic, which should come up here momentarily. Mentalic works like this. A clinician can get the client's permission to record the clinical session. The recording is then uploaded to Mentalic's website. As it says right here, don't let writing notes affect your love for therapy. Effortless, automated notes and treatment plans for mental health providers, save time, and it works like this.
This is Chloe. She's a psychotherapist who is 100% dedicated to helping her clients in the best way there is. But life is not that easy. Keeping up with documentation is very time-consuming, and time is in short supply. She tries to take as many notes as possible while with clients, but this is not improving the quality of her sessions. And instead of unplugging and spending time with her family, she is working late nights to document her sessions from memory. Chloe remembers a fellow therapist mentioning Mentalic. Mentalic is a new tool that takes notes on its own, using AI technology that's already being applied successfully in solutions for other professionals. Mentalic was tailored specifically to meet the needs of psychotherapists. The tool extracts the most important information directly from session recordings and translates these automatically into progress notes. When using Mentalic, Chloe can fully focus on her clients. All she needs to do is review the notes after a session and approve them, leaving her evenings free to relax and recharge. We also know how important security is when it comes to protecting clients' data, so we made sure Mentalic is HIPAA compliant. All of the information you enter is being anonymized and encrypted. Besides summarizing sessions, Mentalic is a great tool for supervision and training. Want to learn more?
You get the idea. And I suspect some of you have heard of a company by the name of Amazon. Anybody ever heard of the company by the name of Amazon? Like, how many packages have you already gotten delivered today? Well, Amazon has a subsidiary called AWS, Amazon Web Services, which has a subsidiary called HealthScribe. Well, Amazon's HealthScribe, just a friendly reminder to mute. Some of you are not muted, and we're hearing some background noise. I'm going to have to mute somebody there. Okay, so this is Amazon Web Services, HealthScribe.
clinicians devote a significant part of their day to administrative work, documenting patient visits. Time and energy spent on these tasks impede clinician productivity and contribute to burnout. Healthcare software vendors want to harness AI in their clinical application to reduce documentation burden, but face implementation challenges with complexity, security, and trust. Enter AWS HealthScribe, a HIPAA-eligible service that allows clinicians more time with patients, fostering a better patient-clinician relationship. AWS HealthScribe is empowering healthcare software vendors to build clinical applications that automatically generate clinical notes by analyzing patient-clinician conversations. With AWS HealthScribe, you can integrate conversational and generative AI in your telehealth or in-clinic application to solve various challenges. And the best part is, you don't need machine learning experience to use it. AWS HealthScribe automatically provides rich conversation transcripts, identifies speaker roles, classifies dialogue, extracts medical terms, and generates preliminary clinical notes. These capabilities are combined in a single API, removing the need to integrate and optimize separate AI services, enabling you to expedite implementation in your healthcare application. AWS HealthScribe helps healthcare software vendors use AI responsibly by including references to original patient transcripts for every sentence in the AI-generated clinical notes. Security and privacy are built in to ensure input audio and output text are not stored in AWS HealthScribe to protect sensitive patient data. Start with AWS Health.
And there are other companies too. Here's one called Blueprint AI. The AI assistant for mental health therapists. Blueprint automates progress notes, drafts smart treatment plans, and surfaces actionable insights. Interesting phrase, surfaces actionable insights before, during, and after every client session. There are others. Again, I just want to repeat, particularly for those of you who may have come in a little late, I'm not endorsing any products here, not my role. I'm giving examples. Here is Upheal. Upheal. Secure AI progress notes that save you time, designed for therapists, psychiatrists, and coaches. Our AI-generated notes help you stay more present during sessions and save precious time. I mentioned that AI tools are being used for supervision purposes. One example is Listen, Lyssn. Get it? Kind of clever, Listen. This is specifically for people who are supervisors, who evaluate supervisees' work. And what Listen does is it uses its rich database of evidence-based practices and provides immediate feedback for supervision purposes. See what it says right down here? Train and support staff. And what Listen does is it draws on the best available evidence regarding, for example, the use of CBT, DBT, EMDR, solution-focused therapy, narrative therapy, whatever it is, draws on the best available evidence, best practices, and will then listen to a recording of a clinical session that's been uploaded and provide remarkably nuanced, granular feedback to the supervisee about what's going well, what skills the supervisee might want to work on. It's designed for that purpose. So there's a lot of stuff going on out there. And this is just a small sample of what's out there. So now let's pivot and
Dr.
talk about,
Reamer,
yeah, go ahead, please, go ahead.
there was a question about these AI tools. I'm curious about mental health caused by health diagnosis or chronic illness. Is there an AI tool for that issue?
There's more than one. There's more than one. And if we have time, I can show them to you. But yep, they're out there. Pick a healthcare condition, pick a behavioral health condition, and it would not take me too long to find an example. Actually, Mary, can you repeat exactly what the question was? I want to be sure I understood it.
I'm curious about mental health caused by health diagnosis or chronic illness.
Uh-huh. And whether there's an AI tool that can be used to assist somebody struggling with those issues?
Yes.
Okay, so folks, I'm going to take advantage of this. to try to illustrate what AI might be able to do. All right, so we didn't rehearse this. I didn't know Mary was going to ask that question, or one of you. So I'm going to pull up ChatGPT. ChatGPT is just one of a number of AI tools out there. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with ChatGPT, but there are others that I like even more, but this is one you're probably familiar with. So I'm just going to type in here, are there artificial intelligence tools that can be used to help people who have been diagnosed with a chronic health condition? Mary, did I get that? Is that close enough to the wording?
I think so.
Okay. Well, let's see. Yes, there are several artificial intelligence tools that can help people diagnosed with chronic health conditions in various ways. And I'm not going to read all this, but you can see there is a very detailed response of the ways in which AI can be used for personalized health management and monitoring, using AI-powered apps, which I mentioned, wearable devices, which I mentioned, predictive analytics, which I mentioned, also known as algorithmic forecasting. Look, for chronic pain management, predicting flare-ups and complications, using AI to predict flare-ups or complications given that user's particular history, and so forth and so on. And then there are some products that are listed, and I'm not going, again, I can't endorse any of these, right? But then they actually list several products. Okay, so there you go in real time. So what I would like to do is ask you folks some questions, and I hope this works. Ba, 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 ba. All right, so the order here is a little funky, but I hope what it says poll one is my first question. Let's try this out. On the screen, you should see, okay, that worked. Please indicate the professional license you hold, if any. I'm guessing most of you have a license. Some of you may be working toward a license. Please indicate the professional license you hold, if any. Mental health counseling, marriage and family therapy, psychiatry/medicine, psychology, social work, nursing, chemical dependency, or other. And then there's another question there. In what type of setting, you have to scroll down to see it. In what, you don't put it in the chat. Please answer the poll question, which, Mary, I'm hoping people can see. In what type of setting do you work primarily? Right? Private practice, outpatient mental health, outpatient substance use disorder treatment, residential treatment, and so forth. We can't capture every setting out there. You should see a third question there. Please indicate the extent to which you agree or disagree with this statement. It is appropriate for behavioral health practitioners to use artificial intelligence to assess clients or potential clients' clinical symptoms. A Likert scale, strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. A fourth question. Please indicate the extent to which you agree or disagree with this statement. It is appropriate for behavioral health practitioners to use artificial intelligence to generate clinical notes following a client encounter, like using one of the products I showed you. Number 5, to what extent is it appropriate for behavioral health practitioners to use AI to enable clients to engage in self-monitoring of their symptoms? Number 6, to what extent is it appropriate for behavioral health practitioners to use AI to create content for documents such as grant applications, reports prepared for program funders, program evaluations, that sort of thing? Those are the 6 questions on this screen, and then I think we have a few more. So if you would just take a moment and complete those. About 2/3 of you have completed them. Great. And if you'll bear with me, we'll wait a minute, and I'll share the results with you, and then I have a few other questions for you, which, Mary, I'm guessing are on a different screen, the remaining questions.
The poll questions are, you scroll down, and if you use the get QR code, it'll take you to them so you can answer them.
Okay. All right. I think there are a few other questions. I'm going to try to find when we're done with these 6. But bear with me. While we wait for everybody to complete these, I appreciate your patience. I'll wait just another minute. I realize some of you may be sitting in pairs or trios and only one of you can answer. So I'll just wait another minute or so. All right, in the interest of time, I'm just going to stop it here and I will share the results. And you can see that about 30% of you are mental health counselors. We have a couple of marriage and family therapists. About 2/3 of you are social workers. I'm a social worker, secret handshake for the social workers there. We have a few people who are chemical dependency, substance use disorder specialists. We've got a few others. Feel free to put in the chat what other is in your professional life. Um, a number of you are in private practice, but about 1/3 of you outpatient mental health. 8 of you outpatient substance use disorder treatment. A few of you in residential treatment. 5 of you in a criminal justice setting, which is where I've spent much of my time. Again, secret handshake for the criminal justice people. We have several school-based counselors, social workers, a number of you, about a fifth of you in hospital or healthcare facilities, and then the proverbial other. Feel free to put in the chat. Okay, I'm scrolling down. I hope you can see this. So I asked you your opinion about the extent to which it's appropriate for behavioral health practitioners to use AI to assess clients or potential clients' clinical symptoms. And you can see that, interestingly, almost three quarters of you have some degree of comfort using AI to assess clients or potential clients' clinical symptoms. Great, fine. I'm going to raise some concerns about that in just a few minutes. The next question, number 4, the extent to which it's appropriate for behavioral health practitioners to use AI to generate clinical notes. Interestingly, almost 4/5 of you are inclined to support the potential use of AI to generate clinical notes. And I completely get that. And I'm also going to share some concerns with you in just a few minutes. I'll just say this at this point. I spend an enormous amount of my time raising this hand when I have to solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I do that in 2 kinds of cases throughout the United States, including Idaho, where behavioral health practitioners are named in lawsuits alleging negligence, and when behavioral health practitioners have licensing board complaints filed against them. I spend an enormous amount of my time consulting on those cases, testifying at trial, testifying in depositions, testifying in licensing board hearings. And I will tell you this, in almost every single case, the quality of documentation typically determines the outcome of the case. That's not hyperbole. That's not an exaggeration. In my experience, it's a fact. Documentation typically has an awful lot to do with the outcome of the lawsuit, alleging failure to prevent a suicide, failure to prevent a client from killing somebody else, not protecting a client's confidential information properly, mismanagement alleged of boundary issues in dual relationships for a clinician who lives and works in rural Idaho, the redundancy for many of you. Documentation is key. And I am now seeing notes that are projected on the screen in the courtroom during the deposition, which is sworn testimony, at licensing board hearings, projected on the screen, the large LED screen that you might find in a sports bar in Boise or Coeur d'Alene or Nampa or wherever. And your notes will be picked apart by opposing counsel. That's the only reason they put them up there. And now I am starting to see notes that were generated by AI tools, notes that have significant errors in them that the clinician didn't catch. And they are now displayed on the screen for everybody to see. More about that in a few minutes. Number 5, the extent to which you're comfortable using AI, the idea of using AI to enable clients to engage in self-monitoring of their symptoms. And look at that, right? Nearly all of you are to some extent comfortable using AI for that purpose. And with regard to creating content for documents such as grant applications, reports prepared for program funders, and so on, here too, nearly all of you. So this is a crowd, and I will tell you that you folks in Idaho are much more supportive of the use of AI than I am seeing elsewhere around the country. Interesting, interesting. So I don't know, Mary, if because there are a number of other poll questions here. Yeah, and they're redundant. Okay, so let me just look at one more to see whether. All right, I'm just going to stop it here. No problem. No problem. Don't worry about it. It's okay.
Dr. Reamer, I think I can get at the other questions. I can see them. They just aren't included with all these 6 here.
Yeah, don't worry about it. I'm going to just look real quickly, and if I can't, don't worry about it. I've covered the bulk of the issues I want to raise. It's not worth futzing with the technology. It's okay. So you folks have some varying opinions, but as I said, much more supportive of the use of AI than I typically see, which is fascinating to me. And we can talk about that. Okay. So what are the ethical issues? So today's webinar is focused especially on what are the ethical challenges associated with the use of AI. And I would say at this point in time, and I'm saying this as somebody who has spent the better part of the last year and a half. I mean, not every minute of every day. I mean, I like having fun. I like spending time with my wife and my children and all that sort of stuff. But in my professional life, I've been spending a lot of time identifying what I think are the core ethical issues that we need to deal with related to the use of AI. And I've identified 10 of them. Number one, informed consent, right? So Mary raised that question that one of you raised about the use of AI, say for people on probation or on parole, right? Do you need informed consent? And the answer is, well, in some settings, yes, but in probation parole, maybe not, because they lose their liberty interests to some extent. But I still believe in full disclosure. In any case, the question I'm asking over and over and over again, number one, to what extent do clients know how data they share with practitioners, including data in electronic health records, will be used? So I know of some clients who met with a clinician, the notes were generated by an AI tool like the ones I showed you, and the clients did not fully understand that their clinical session was uploaded to an AI platform which listened, air quotes, not a human being, and it's stored at least temporarily in the cloud. Client signed a consent form. The record indicates they consented. But when you ask them in depth, what do you think is really happening here? Turns out they don't fully understand this, which under the law is not informed consent. It's consent, but it's not informed consent. Number two, transparency related to informed consent. The question I'm asking repeatedly when behavioral health practitioners are using AI tools, are practitioners who use the AI tools sufficiently transparent with clients about the potential benefits and risks? Number three, privacy invasion. So we've all heard stories about how online databases have been invaded, hacking. Is it pervasive? I don't think it is. Are there some bad incidents? Yes, there are. Well, when clients and members of the general public share deeply personal information about themselves using AI tools, I think we need to be concerned about potential privacy invasion. Is there a risk to clients' privacy when they share personal information with AI platforms and tools? Number four, autonomy. In the ethics world, and that's the world I live in, we use the word autonomy a lot, right? That's a core value. Some of us use the phrase self-determination, autonomy, whatever. We know what it means. We want to promote clients' autonomy. And one of the questions I'm asking is, well, when we use AI, do clients risk any loss of autonomy? like they're interacting with a chatbot, not a human being. They don't have a lot of control over that other than to engage in an online conversation, a digital conversation. In theory, I think clients lose some control over data storage, right? Who has access to their data? Number 5, in response to the poll question, one of the poll questions, many of you said you are comfortable using AI tools, either you strongly agreed or agreed, to help assess clients' clinical symptoms, risks, diagnosis. Well, number 5, I am concerned about the potential for misdiagnosis. In clinical settings, the question I ask, is there a risk that clients would be harmed if artificial intelligence misdiagnoses their symptoms and leads them in the wrong treatment direction? If I have time, I will show you an article that was published yesterday on this very issue. An article, I was consulted by the reporter, a reporter who worked for the New York Times for many, many years, now has an independent website. And in that article, she discusses what we call AI hallucinations. What's an AI hallucination? We all know what a hallucination is in the behavioral health sense. What's AI hallucination? It's when a user describes symptoms, challenges, concerns, and the AI tool, which can be remarkably accurate and responsive, doesn't respond accurately. It hallucinates and it leads users in the wrong direction. And as somebody who's an expert witness in a lot of litigation cases around the US and a lot of licensing board cases around the US, including Idaho, I'm concerned about potential liability risks. If the AI tool doesn't pick up on the suicidal ideation, the client, the user may not be using the word suicide, may not be explicitly saying, I don't think I want to live any longer. It's more subtle. It's more subtle. And is the AI tool using its generative data mining sophisticated enough to pick up on the nuances in a way that a clinician might if they were meeting in
Dr.
person?
Reamer, uh,
Mhm.
sorry for interrupting. There's a
Okay.
couple of questions, and I didn't want to get too far ahead.
That's fine. That's fine.
One was, are there BAAs, acronym,
Yep.
associated with some of these sites?
Yep. Very standard. Very standard. So for those of you who think Mary's talking about the sound a sheep makes, nope, that's not what she's referring to. She's referring to a business associate agreement required by HIPAA. HIPAA requires business associate agreements, BAA, and they are standard for these when clinicians are using AI tools. I can't say that every single one of them has it because I can't, I don't know every tool that's out there, but the ones that I reviewed typically do have BAA built into their protocols.
Okay, a second question, and I have one
Mhm.
more after this.
That's
What
fine.
about if a client shares that they had a substance use relapse with you on
Mhm.
AI and they are
Mhm.
worried that they are going to have legal actions?
Yeah. So, um, so I'm not quite sure exactly what the intent of the question is. I'm guessing is it possible that the self-disclosure in an AI tool could be used against them? In theory, I suppose the answer is yes. Do I think it is a high risk that a disclosure using an AI tool about relapse or somebody who says I feel horribly guilty because I relapsed and I stole from the local Walmart or whatever, could that be used against somebody? In theory, yes. I don't think the risk is high, but I also don't think it's zero. And I think that's where disclaimers come in, right? If anybody's going to use an AI tool, I think it needs to incorporate a very carefully worded disclaimer about the potential risks, the potential benefits, but the potential for privacy invasion, incursions, all that sort of thing. Even if they're not likely, I think people need to go into these things with their eyes open.
Thank you. And the last was, I don't see it spelled out on this slide. The
Mhm.
misdiagnosis bullet seems closest, but the risk of using AI for clinical decision making in life, death, or danger violence risk
Hmm.
circumstances such as
Hmm.
involuntary hold, criminal
Yep.
commitments, etc.,
Yep.
is a
Hmm.
huge concern.
Yeah. So actually, I'm going to be talking about that. So whoever posted that question has sort of anticipated one of the issues I'm going to talk about after the break. So you're spot on, spot on.
That's it.
Okay. Okay. So I commented briefly on the first five. Now number six, the risk of abandonment. So that term abandonment is a legal term. I imagine, again, many of you are familiar with it, most of you perhaps. Lawyers use the word abandonment to refer to, in behavioral health, the premature termination of services, that can be constitute abandonment, not being sufficiently responsive to a client who's in crisis in a timely fashion, that can constitute abandonment. And so the question I'm asking with AI is number six, is there a risk that clients who rely on AI will not receive timely responses, meaningful responses, especially if they're having crises? Will there be sufficient continuity of care? I mentioned the term escalation protocols. I mean, that's jargon. And a little bit later, I'll talk about escalation protocols to ensure, ideally, that somebody who's using an AI tool and who is in crisis, suicidal ideation, for example, will be connected to a human being, that the AI tool has built in an escalation protocol to bring this concern to the attention of a human being, if necessary, to avoid abandonment, number six. Number seven, surveillance. AI tools can surveil clients. I mentioned how some criminal justice agencies are using AI to monitor clients' whereabouts, people on probation, parole. And there are some states, and I'm not here to make a political statement, that's not my job, but I think all of us know that there are some states in the US where the abortion laws are so strict, and I think those of you in Idaho know what I'm talking about, and there are other states as well, where there is, in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, I can't give you legal advice, but I consult with a lot of lawyers on this issue, where in some states, where, for example, if abortion is illegal, and I recognize among us, we might have different opinions about whether you want to be pro choice or anti abortion or what have you, where in some states, if behavioral health practitioners are promoting AI tools that clients use to share information about an unplanned pregnancy, their wish for advice about resources they can access, abortion related resources. What other states near Idaho can I go to? Right? If the behavioral health practitioner facilitates that, some lawyers have said to me that number one, the client could be exposed to criminal prosecution, and the behavioral health practitioner, in theory, could be exposed to criminal prosecution for, quote, aiding and abetting. Quote, aiding and abetting. Number eight, plagiarism and dishonesty. I mentioned that briefly before. I know for a fact that some behavioral practitioners are using AI to generate content for their websites, their forms. Those of you who are designing a social media policy, consent forms for the use of AI tools, right? You go into some AI tool to find the content that is drawn from other people's work, right? Sometimes there are footnotes. And so now there are some serious questions about plagiarism and intellectual property abuse, where some behavioral practitioners have been a little too lax about acknowledging the sources they've relied on using AI to generate content for their own behavioral health practices. So we have to be concerned about plagiarism and dishonesty. Number nine, algorithmic fairness and bias. In my work, I spend a considerable amount of time talking about, writing about algorithmic bias, especially. So, for those of you not familiar with this, AI generative tools will typically draw on the best available evidence, evidence informed responses, when providing people with information about, for example, how to cope with their chronic anxiety or their clinical depression or their concern about relapse risk or what have you. And if the AI tool is drawing on databases, research studies that include samples that do not accurately represent your clients, then the advice the AI tool is generating may be biased, what we call algorithmic bias. So, as an example, let us suppose hypothetically your clientele is largely low income, people of color, people who identify as LGBTQ plus, what have you. And you're using an AI tool that provides these users with information about the challenges they experience. And the AI tool is drawing on databases that don't include a lot of people of color, people who are low income, whose services are paid by Medicaid as opposed to Blue Cross, United, or what have you. Maybe people who identify as LGBTQ plus. And so users might be getting information, advice that's not really based on who they are, algorithmic bias. I would bet you money that there are organizations in Idaho that are using AI to screen applications for jobs. So, in theory, you decide you want to apply for a job at a behavioral health organization somewhere in Idaho. You go online, you can submit your application online, upload your resume, your CV, whatever. I would bet you money that some of those behavioral health organizations are using AI to screen your application. They do not have a human being in HR. That's the way we used to do it, screening the application. AI is screening it to try to identify, ooh, really strong candidate. You ought to go interview this one. Or this one, not so much. Well, there too, I think there's the potential for algorithmic bias. And then finally, number 10, in the list of core ethical issues, as I said, I spend an enormous amount of my time serving as what the courts call an expert witness in litigation and in licensing board cases, including in Idaho, along with many other states. And so the question I'm asking in 2025, which a couple of years ago I was not asking, do practitioners who rely on AI risk being named in ethics complaints, in lawsuits, alleging, for example, failure to comply with state-of-the-art protocols related to AI, informed consent standards, confidentiality protocols, and so forth? So I recently came across a discussion of my thinking about some of these ethical issues. And I want to play just a few minutes of this exchange to give you a sense of what I'm going to talk about after the break. So, Mary, let me know if you can't hear this. I hope it comes through. I'm just playing a couple of minutes.
You know, it seems like we're always hearing about AI, right? Like it's popping up everywhere.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's kind of crazy. I swear, even my music app like knows my mood before I do half the time. But get this. AI is even changing how social work is done these days.
It really is. And, it brings up a ton of questions about how we can use this tech responsibly
Mm-hmm.
to actually help people,
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. We've got this lecture by Professor Frederic Reamer, and he really lays out the challenges of bringing AI into social work.
Yeah, and what I found really interesting about his lecture is he doesn't shy away from how complicated it all is.
Yeah.
He's honest about the good stuff AI can do, but also all the areas where we've got to be super careful.
Totally. It's like we're all kind of figuring this out as we go, right? It's not every day that a whole new set of tools comes along that could completely change how we approach an entire profession. You know what I mean?
I totally agree. And that's what makes this deep dive so relevant, even if you're not a social worker. Because think about it. AI could be affecting how your kids' school counselors are figuring out which students need extra help, or even how resources are given to people experiencing homelessness. It's going to impact all of us in some way.
So, okay, before we get too deep into it all, let's just back up for a second, make sure we're on the same page. What exactly is AI and how does it work? We hear the term like all the time, but sometimes it feels like magic, you know?
Yeah, it can definitely feel that way. Okay, so basically, AI is like combining computer science with tons and tons of data to make systems that can do things that usually need human intelligence.
Yeah.
But it's not really about like copying human thought exactly. It's more about teaching computers to learn from all that data and make decisions based on what they find.
So instead of like programming a computer with specific rules, we're giving it like a zillion examples and letting it figure out the rules for itself.
You got it. That's where machine learning comes in. It's a type of AI where computers get better at something by, learning from experience. And the different ways to do this machine learning thing, each one good for different problems. Like there's supervised learning, where you give the AI data that's already labeled, think like images of cats and dogs that learns to tell them apart. And then you've got unsupervised learning, where you just give it a bunch of data that's not labeled, and it's got to find patterns and groups on its own.
Okay, I see how this could be super helpful in social work. You could have an AI that goes through case files to find families at risk of homelessness, or maybe helps therapists tailor their approach for each client.
Exactly. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Professor Reamer in his lecture talks about how AI is already being used in tons of ways. One that really stood out to me was this thing called the Crisis Contact Simulator from the Trevor Project.
Awesome.
It's like this AI-powered tool to train counselors working with LGBTQ youth in crisis.
Wow. Yeah, I can see how that would be incredibly helpful. It's like having a safe space to practice for those really sensitive and high pressure situations, right? Before they're actually dealing with them in real life.
Exactly. It lets counselors build their skills and confidence so they can really be there for those kids. And then there are these AI-powered apps made for veterans, like PTSD Coach and Mindfulness Coach, which have tools for dealing with stress, anxiety, and stuff related to PTSD.
I feel like that's especially important, considering all the unique challenges veterans face when they come home. Traditional therapy isn't always easy to access or a good fit for everyone. So,
So I'm going to stop it here. And, that last comment about AI tools that have been designed to assist veterans, when I heard that, I thought back to the first time I provided a lecture training at the VA Medical Center in Boise, right? When none of this was possible for those veterans served by the Boise VA. Now, why did I share that little dialogue with you? If you were to listen to the entire exchange, it moves into the direction of what do I think the key ethical issues are, the risk management issues that we need to grapple with. That dialogue you just heard, those two people are not people. Let me repeat what you just heard. Those are not human beings. That conversation is completely AI generated. It took me about 4 minutes. It took me about 4 minutes to create that conversation. Now, how many of you, until I just said that, thought, whoa, there are a couple of people there who are, talking about Reamer's work. That's kind of interesting. How many of you knew that those were not human beings? And that is the point, that AI is so powerful that we can create, and again, it took me about 4 minutes to create that, to create the impression that people who are talking are not real people. You may have clients who create bogus conversations among people in their lives and go into your office and play the recording for you. And it turns out it's all deep fake. It's bogus. Now, I'm not suggesting that the typical client's going to do that. Of course not. But is it possible? You bet. You bet. That's pretty powerful stuff. And maybe you're surprised at how powerful these AI tools are. And that's just one example. And I noticed one of you put in the chat, it sounds like they were reading from a script. They were not reading from a script. I am actually blown away by how accurate their insights are regarding the research the AI tool reviewed that I wrote. That's what the AI tool is reviewing, and it converts it into a conversation. They were not reading from a script. Their words are not the words that I wrote in the research that they reviewed. They are not sort of copying and pasting my words for audio purposes. Nope. The AI tool, within a couple of minutes, reviews what I wrote and converts it into a conversation with some ums, some jokes later. It's all AI generated. I didn't write any of that stuff. And it's pretty darn accurate. So let me, and again, we will take a break soon. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. All right.
Dr. Reamer, there is a question.
I heard you inhale there, so go ahead, go for it.
Do you have the article link on the misdiagnosis that you mentioned to share?
Yeah. If you give me a moment.
You can always send it to me and I can email it to everyone after the session is over too.
Okay, so this should take me just a moment. I can pull it up, I think, and put it in the chat. And just give me 30 seconds. And if it doesn't pop right up, I found it. Okay, I found it. So I just have to load it. Then I'm going to share it. And I'm going to put it in the chat. So this is yesterday. Let me switch screens here. Through the wonders of modern technology. Let's hope this works. So this is a website that's maintained by this reporter, Jean Pinder. And she, as I said, and I didn't know her. She reached out to me. And let me put this in the chat before I forget. Hold on here. And Mary, just please confirm that it came through for everybody if they want to grab it. So
it's in the
she
chat.
called me. Yeah, okay. It's in there. Okay. So you can see the date, March 13th. That's like yesterday. And therapy notes by AI create false narratives, therapists say. And she, Jean Pinder, who, as I said, told me she worked for the New York Times for many years, and it's true. She wrote this pretty detailed article about so-called hallucination with AI tools, that some of the AI tools are documenting clinical symptoms, misdiagnosing. There it is. See right where my cursor is? There's the reference to hallucinations. Okay? The widely observed hallucinations, I'm right down here, that AI is prone to, the term used when AI makes stuff up and blithely reports out things that are just not true, have been seen in AI notes, which are much more likely to have significant repercussions if they crawl into a patient's records. This belief in AI's infallibility leads to, in some cases, the thought that their products do not need to be fact-checked. And if you go through, you read this thing, and you'll see that she quotes me, a fair amount in this thing with regard to some of these issues, and other people too. And I think I read through this yesterday when she sent it to me, and I thought, yeah, I think what she is describing, this is where she starts to use my, sound bites down here. And so that's one example. Okay. By the way, since we're on the subject of notes, let me make this point. So I get it that these AI tools to generate clinical notes are very appealing, time-saving, in tremendous ways. And I would say, as I say in my quote in that article that I just showed you, that the ones that I've reviewed a lot, are pretty darn accurate in most respects. However, I have caught significant, to use the lawyer language, errors and omissions. Errors and omissions. Errors. AI heard the client say something, but misinterpreted it. And it's in the note. Okay. May have heard the word beer, as in drinking a beer. I don't know if anybody does that in Idaho. Does anybody in Idaho drink beer? May have thought the client said, I had a beer, but what the client said is, I saw a bear. Are there any bears in Idaho? And maybe misconstrued what the client says. So now you've got a reference to drinking beer when the client was referring to a bear, and they have a bear phobia or something. I don't know. Okay, so there can be errors, but there can also be omissions. So how about this one? How many of you have ever had a client who, in the middle of a clinical session, has a traumatic memory? You bring up a subject that's very provocative, and the client begins to cry. Have any of you ever had a client begin to cry in the middle of a session? And I bet the answer is yes. Yes. Now, as a clinician, would you be inclined to document in your note that the client started to cry when this topic came up, when you asked that question? Would that be clinically relevant information? Okay. And I bet the answer for many of you is yes. But tell me this. If the client consents to the use of an AI tool to generate your clinical note, the session is recorded. That's how it works, and it's uploaded. How does an AI tool hear tears? At least in Rhode Island, where I am, maybe it's different in Idaho. If somebody's just crying, there's no sound. Maybe it's different in Idaho, but in Rhode Island, there's no sound. I mean, maybe somebody's wailing, then there's a sound. But I've seen people cry, the tears are coming down, but AI can't hear the tears. Here's another one. Have you ever had a client who becomes quite agitated during a clinical session? The subject of, the X comes up, or my adolescent is doing this to me, and they can become quite agitated. And they get up in the middle of a session and they start pacing the room, kind of nervously. Anybody ever had a client pace the room, right? And maybe that's clinically relevant. How does an AI tool hear the client get up and pace the room? And note that. Here's another one, and I'll be brief. This is a real case. A case talking about complicated ethical issues. And you're right, Laurie, they can't hear body language that you might note for clinical purposes. The client who's having difficulty making eye contact, the client whose leg just doesn't stop shaking, what have you. And how about this one? This is a real case. A client who is in recovery, doing the hard work in therapy to address challenges in his life. And this is a client who 7 years ago was actively using and selling heroin. And I've worked with a lot of people who use heroin, a lot of people who sell heroin, often to support their own drug addiction. And I bet some of you have as well. And here is a client who served prison time, who has worked so hard to sustain recovery, is making great use of therapy. And during a clinical session today, picture this, during a clinical session today, says to the therapist, I just have to tell you something. I've been keeping this to myself for years. It's wearing away at me. I feel so guilty, and I need to talk about this. And you're thinking, okay, here we go. And clients sometimes do that. And in this actual case, the client says, I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed. 7 years ago, when I was actively using and selling heroin, I was selling bags of heroin to a guy behind the atomic bowling alley. It was about 2 a.m. And he ripped me off. He grabbed bags of heroin. He didn't pay me. And I freaked out. I needed the money. And the truth is, I carried a gun because I was a heroin dealer. Some heroin dealers carry guns. I know a lot of heroin dealers. Some of them carry guns. It's dangerous business. And I chased after the guy, the client says, and he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't pay me. And I fired shots in the air to try to scare him, and he kept running, and I'm desperate, and I chased after him, and I fired shots in his direction to scare him. I didn't want to hit him. But he's running, I'm running, my aim is bad, and I hit him. And I ran over to him because he's on the ground, bleeding, and he's dead. I killed him. This is a real case. And I ran, and I got away with it. I've never been charged, never been arrested, never been tried, never been convicted. To quote the title of a book and a movie, got away with murder. And he feels guilty. And he says to the therapist, today, that guy didn't deserve to die. Yes, he ripped me off. We're both in bad shape. And I feel horrible. And I want to talk to you about how to deal with this. That's what's happening today. And on that day, the clinician does not think that client on that day poses, to use the three-part test for disclosure of confidential information without client consent, does not have evidence that that client on that day of disclosure poses an imminent, serious, or foreseeable threat. That's the three-part test. On that day, he's doing well. He doesn't pose an imminent, serious, or foreseeable threat. So I would ask you this question. In Idaho, would you say, ethically, if you have a client who discloses that he committed a murder 7 years ago, and today he does not pose a threat to anybody, as far as you can tell, how many of you would say that falls under duty to warn, duty to protect? You have to disclose that murder. My opinion is absolutely not. You can't. You're not allowed to, unless you have reason to believe that disclosure would likely prevent imminent, serious, foreseeable threat today. I'm not minimizing the seriousness of a murder, of course not. But if that evidence isn't there, I don't think you can disclose it. And my opinion, feel free to disagree, my opinion is if you're documenting that session, it would be a profound mistake to put in your notes, client disclosed that he committed a murder 7 years ago. Because I know, and this is the world I live in, your notes, we all know this, can be subpoenaed. They can be ordered disclosed by a court of law in a child custody case, a termination of parental rights case, a divorce proceeding. I've seen it many times when clinicians' notes are subpoenaed, ordered disclosed, and you've got a note that says client disclosed that he committed a murder, and the disclosure then ends up being used against the client. The client then files the lawsuit, the licensing board complaint saying, you shouldn't have documented that in a way that could be disclosed. You violated my rights, and I'm going after you. To me, and feel free to disagree, but my opinion, having been involved in this case, is that that note should have said, client disclosed details about a past traumatic event. Vague. Client shared feelings of guilt, remorse. We discussed ways to cope, or something along those lines. Because I have to think like a chess player, I would argue, and anticipate the possibility that my notes will be subpoenaed someday, and I may not be able to limit their disclosure. And I see that a lot. But back to AI. If the AI tool is generating the note, guess what the AI tool heard? The AI tool heard the client say, 7 years ago, I committed a murder. Here's what happened. And guess what the AI tool is going to do? It's going to put that fact in the note. And here's the potential downside to these notes. In my opinion, I find that some behavioral health practitioners are drawn to this technology, the AI technology, because it saves time. I get that completely. And that sometimes clinicians are so eager to save time regarding documentation that they are not proofreading the AI-generated note carefully. They're too hasty. They're not proofreading carefully. They're not editing carefully. They didn't even notice that the reference to the murder was in there. They didn't pull it out. They didn't reword it. And then they hit submit. And guess what? As soon as you click submit, you have just locked that note. It is there. And if your notes are subpoenaed, you're not going to unring that bell. That bell has been rung. I have seen these problems. So, back to my point. I think these AI tools can be wonderfully powerful and helpful, save us lots of time, And every coin I know has two sides. And I think there is also significant risk, ethics related risk associated with the use of some of these tools, which is why I argue we need to use them or consider using them with our eyes wide open. Mary, I know we need to take a break, but before we do that, are there any questions you want to share?
Yes, there was one asking what AI tool did you use for that AI generated conversation?
Aha. Well, I'm like a magician. I'm not allowed to tell my secrets. No, I can. I can tell you what I did. It's called Notebook LM. Notebook LM. LM for language like machine learning, but they reverse the letters. Notebook LM. Notebook LM is actually a Google product. Shocking, huh? It's a Google product. And you have to register, you have to learn how to use it. And it's really powerful. I could use Notebook LM. I could take that recording and there's an option there. I can say, generate a study guide for that dialogue. I think that one's like 13 minutes, something like that. And within like 10 seconds, it will generate a study guide for that dialogue. It'll generate like test questions. It's remarkable. So anyway, that one's Notebook LM. Check it out.
There's
What else do you
one
have,
other
Mary?
question.
Sure, sure, sure.
Who monitors the AI program that is used?
The Wizard of Oz. Those of you who are old enough to remember The Wizard of Oz, that who is monitoring all this behind the curtain. There's no human being. I mean, in effect, there's no human being like the Wizard of Oz, like, behind the curtain, like monitoring all this stuff. That's why these AI tools, in my opinion, have to have embedded in them protocols to manage risk, especially high risk. I know it's jargon, and I apologize for the jargon, but what I referred to earlier is escalation protocols. The AI tool has to be designed to pick up. I'm not going to comment on what somebody just put in the chat. It's too political. You folks can chat among yourselves. Um, 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 that's why I think if we're going to use any of these tools, we need to know exactly what kinds of risk management protocols um, the AI tools are building in to try to prevent harm, manage risk, these so-called escalation protocols.
That's it.
Okay. Oh, by the way, so let me make this one point and then we'll take a break. So I deal with a lot of suicide cases in my risk management work. It's sad, but it's the reality. I deal with a lot of suicide related cases. So if you take a look, for example, and if you take a look at one of my recent books, which is this thing called Risk Management in the Behavioral Health Professions, a practical guide to preventing malpractice and licensing board complaints. And if you take a look at chapter 3, right down here, chapter 3, these are litigation risks, negligence risks, malpractice risks, licensing board risks associated with different kinds of clinical interventions, different services. In that chapter, chapter 3, I have lots of examples of cases I've been involved in where suicide was an issue, where allegedly a clinician, and I highlight the word allegedly, a clinician failed to assess suicide risk properly, failed to come up with a state-of-the-art suicide risk management plan. I don't use the word safety plan anymore because I think that's not currently the right language to use, but that's a different story. But a risk management plan. I don't talk about safety contracts anymore. Um, and okay, so imagine a clinician who is using an AI tool. And you will see after the break, I'm going to show you a couple of slides having to do with lawsuits that have been filed, against AI firms associated with a suicide. alleging that the AI tool mismanaged the suicide risk. So that's that. Okay. It is 46 minutes after the hour. I think we're ready for a break. We're going to take a 10-minute break, a 10-minute break. So I will see you promptly at 56 minutes after the hour. 56 minutes after the hour, I'm going to be pretty precise about this. See you in 10. We will resume in about 2 minutes. We'll resume in about a minute. While we're waiting, I noticed one participant is driving. Please keep your eyes on the road, not on me. You know, somebody's on a treadmill, multitasking. Hey, that's pretty cool, huh? I got to meet all these dogs and all these cats. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. All right. So it is 56 minutes after the hour, and we've got another hour and 15 minutes or so. I understand it can be a challenge, can be a bit tedious to sit in front of a screen for yet another webinar. I get that. And I hope you're finding this material engaging and thought-provoking. It's like, oh my goodness. Um, and that, there's some useful takeaways here. So before I dive back into this, Mary, anything you wanted to bring up?
Sorry. It took me a
That's
minute.
okay.
I was
That's all right.
multitasking.
No problem. No
It's
problem.
all good.
Okay. All right. So I'll invite Mary later to bring forth any other questions or comments. All right. So before the break, I shared with you my current thinking about the most compelling ethical issues that I think we need to deal with. And in the good news department, I think we as behavioral health practitioners have several resources we can draw on. For those of you who are thinking about using AI or who are using AI, and again, I just want to acknowledge that some of you might be sitting here thinking, get me away from this stuff. I don't want it. That's not what I signed up for. But for those of you who are inclined to use some AI tools for various purposes, I think there are some resources out there that can be extraordinarily helpful. Now, today, I know from the poll results that we have a mixed crowd. We've got, some mental health counselors, some social workers, a couple of marriage and family therapists, and so forth. And I don't have the time to review some of the emerging ethics-based standards that can be applied to the use of AI. There's just not enough time. So I'm going to give you examples from the profession that I'm in, which is social work. But I can say with some confidence, I think, that what I'm about to share with you, there are analogs in the other behavioral health professions. But I only have time to cover one profession, so I may as well focus on the one that I'm in. And these are projects that I was also involved in, as I'll explain in just a few minutes. So if you think about like a pie chart, um, that has three slices in it. If you can picture a pie chart that has three slices, I'm going to talk about three slices. Each slice, I think, has something to offer us if we want to use AI in ethically responsible ways. So one slice is in the form of, and I'll go to the next slide here. code of ethics standards. So every profession represented here today, mental health counseling, psychology, marriage and family therapy, social work, and so on. Each profession has a code of ethics. Interestingly, unlike the other professions, mental health counseling has 3 of them. The other professions have 1, and mental health counseling has 3. Go figure, and different state licensing boards rely on 1, but maybe not the other 2. You have to find out which one the Idaho board relies on. I think most of you are in Idaho. In any case, so social work has a code of ethics. I'm going to use this as an example. For those of you who are not social workers, NASW is the National Association of Social Workers, roughly comparable to the American Psychological Association, the Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, the American Counseling Association, and so forth. And as I said when we started, I had the opportunity, and it was a great privilege, to have chaired the national task force that wrote this code. Took 2 years out of my life, not every minute, not every day, but a big chunk of 2 years of my life to draft this code along with my colleagues. And we have tweaked it over the years. The bulk of the work that I did on this was in the mid 1990s. So that's 30 years ago-ish. And at that time, technology did not loom large. There was no such thing as remote or telebehavioral health. Had there been a pandemic 30 years ago, we would not have been able to provide services to clients remotely using Zoom for healthcare kind of thing, or Skype, or any of those. There was no text messaging 30 years ago, right? So my colleagues and I have a couple of times updated this code to include technology-related standards. And I believe these technology-related standards, which you will find comparably in other professions' codes of ethics, have a lot to guide us with regard to the use of artificial intelligence. So let me, give me a second here. Let me now pull up a website to show you what I am talking about. Okay. So, okay. I hope you see on the screen. Mary, at any point, tell me, nope, not seeing it if you're not seeing it. I hope you're seeing highlighted revisions to the Code of Ethics. This is social work. And if you scroll down, you will see a lot of yellow, a lot of yellow. The yellow is what my colleagues and I added related to technology. Using language, when I drafted standards for this code in the 1990s, I couldn't have used because it wasn't even in my vocabulary. Some of what you see in yellow, like here, references to social networking sites, online chat, language such as encryption, I'm down here, firewalls, right? This is language that's now prominent, but 30 years ago it wasn't, right? And so codes of ethics now include a lot of technology-related ethics standards that I think are applicable to the use of AI. So one concrete suggestion I have is to be sure you are up to speed with regard to the code of ethics that is currently in force in your behavioral health profession, which may not be the code that was in force when you walked across the stage at Boise State or the University of Idaho or the University of Southern California or UCLA, wherever you went to school. You're held to the current code. And the current codes tend to have a lot of language related to technology regarding things like, oh, you're using AI. What are your informed consent protocols? What are your protocols to protect confidential and private information that's shared using AI? Do you have a social media policy? There's a term I never used until about 10 years ago that explains to clients how you use technology, including possibly AI. We're supposed to spell this stuff out. Language is embedded in code of ethics standards, mandating that we explain this stuff to clients and document that we explained it to them. If we're going to use AI, what kind of training do we need? You see the word competence there, third bullet point from the bottom. What kind of training do we need? I refer to AI as a shiny new toy for a lot of practitioners. Like, this is pretty darn cool. Look at this. I can generate my clinical notes using AI. Wow. Great time saver. Yep. But I worry about clinicians who are using the shiny new toy, which is very attractive, without having taken the time to really learn about prevailing ethical and risk management standards and protocols related to the use of AI. I worry about a clinician who, in theory, I don't think it's statistically likely, right? But you know that bumper sticker that says one nuclear bomb can ruin your entire morning? Like, all you need is one. Most practitioners are never going to get sued for anything. Most practitioners are never going to be named in a licensing board complaint. Most things in life I don't know anything about, or very little, but I know the data on this. Behavioral health practitioners are generally good risks. That said, I spend a ton of my time in litigation and licensing board cases as an expert witness. That book that I showed you is 400 and some pages long, and I had to cut stuff out because it got too long. So people do get sued, small percentage. They do get named in licensing board complaints, small percentage, bigger than lawsuits, but still relatively small percentage. So I worry about the possibility, and I'm all about prevention. And I told you there is now litigation related to behavioral health practitioners' use of AI. And I picture now practitioners who are sworn in as a witness, and you have opposing counsel. I always think about opposing counsel. That's the adversarial cross-examination, not the friendly direct examination, but opposing counsel, it's adversarial. That's the way the system works. I don't like it, but it is the way it works. And I've been cross-examined many times in my career. Not fun. And suppose I'm a practitioner using AI, and opposing counsel representing the plaintiffs, the party bringing the suit, asks me under oath as a stenographer in that courtroom in Boise, getting down every word I say. If I respond to a question with, the transcript will say UH-HUH. If I shake my head like this, I'll be admonished to use words to not shake my head, and the transcript will say affirmative nod. Everything is recorded. And opposing counsel, in my experience, in a case like this, would ask me, what steps did you take before you started using this artificial intelligence tool? What did you study? Did you engage in continuing education? Did you consult the ethical standards in your profession that would be applicable to the use of AI? Did you consult state-of-the-art technology standards that are ethics informed, which I'll show you in just a moment? Did you consult your licensing board's standards, which in some states are embedded in statute, in some states embedded in regulation, statutory law, regulatory law, sometimes both? And a smart lawyer will ask you on the record to explain in detail all the steps you took to be a competent user of AI and to show the documentation that you actually did that. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, I read this book, I read this article, and you have some lawyer in Idaho saying, when did you do that? Can you show me the evidence that you did that? Did you document that you did that? Because I'll tell you what lawyers typically learn, and many of you have probably heard this phrase. The lawyers I work with, they live by this mantra. I don't like it, but they live by it. If it's not written, it did not happen. If it's not written, it did not happen. You say you read that journal article. You say you read that book on artificial intelligence. You say you went to that webinar. Now, the good news is you can get a certificate, right? Print it out as after today. That's great. Then you've got documentation. Shows a good faith effort to learn about these issues, to become competent, so to speak. But lawyers, they look for this stuff. And one of the questions I may ask is, did you look at the code of ethics in your profession, specifically standards applicable to the use of technology, such as artificial intelligence? That's one slice of the pie that has three slices. The next slide, the next slice and slide. Practice standards. So in social work, and again, I'm just using social work as an example because I know it better than the others professions. Several years ago, 4 major national organizations in social work, and these are the big ones in social work, they collaborated, I was told, for the first time in their history on one project. And it was to develop state-of-the-art, ethics-informed standards for the use of technology in social work practice. The National Association of Social Workers, self-explanatory, like APA, AMFT, ACA, ASWB, that's the Association of Social Work Boards, that's the umbrella group of all of the licensing bodies in North America, including Canada. Actually, yesterday I was lecturing in Canada, so I had to talk about regulatory standards in the provinces, not the states. And that's the umbrella group for the Idaho Licensing Board, the Oregon Licensing Board, the state of Washington Licensing Board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Council on Social Work Education, that's the accreditation body. So just like in psychology and counseling, programs that provide graduate degrees have to be accredited. This is the accreditation organization in social work, the Council on Social Work Education, and the so-called Clinical Social Work Association, also a very large, self-explanatory. Several years ago, these 4 organizations collaborated to sponsor a task force that spent a year and a half developing ethics-informed standards for the use of technology to deliver services to clients remotely, interact with them online using digital technology, texting, email, online social networking, electronic health records, standards regarding conducting online searches for information about clients without their knowledge, without their consent, which raises both privacy and boundary issues, I would argue. And this is the second slice of the pie. And I'll show you the document that this group generated, which has become legal evidence in some litigation and licensing board cases, because national standards like this are often used as the measuring rod if there is some dispute about how a practitioner used technology, such as AI. So this document is 61 pages long, right? Not fun reading. In fact, if you struggle with insomnia, this might be a great, inexpensive treatment, right? Doesn't cost you anything, just get the website. And these 4 organizations sponsored the task force that worked for a year and a half on this, and you see the task force there. And you can see that I was asked to chair this thing as well, in addition to chairing the task force that wrote the Social Work Code of Ethics. And we worked really hard. And if you look through this 61-page document, you will see a number of standards that, in my opinion, are applicable to the use of AI. 2.04, right here. Informed consent, discussing the benefits and risks of providing electronic social work services. Well, AI is an electronic social work service. If you're going to use AI, standard 2.06, what kind of competence do you have to demonstrate? Knowledge and skills required when using technology to provide services, AI, among other tools. What about all the confidentiality issues? 2.07, confidentiality in the use of technology. What about explaining to clients how you use AI if you choose to do that? That's a social media policy. So this is the second slice of the pie. And to repeat, I think this document not only provides good guidance, it's also used in litigation. A document like that can be introduced as evidence. And I see this all the time. Exhibit 14 for the plaintiff, Exhibit 17 for the defense. And it gets marked and it's formally admitted into evidence because it's a national standard. The third slice of the pie. I mentioned that for those of you who are licensed, and I'm guessing that's all of you or most of you, in Idaho, there are licensing statutes, statutory law, legislative branch of government, and there are licensing regulations, regulatory law, known as the executive branch of government. Both of those guidelines are applicable to any Idaho behavioral health clinician. Increasingly around the country, licensing boards are adopting standards related to the use of technology applicable to the use of AI, addressing issues related to, well, if you're going to use it, what kind of competence do you have to have? What about informed consent protocols? What steps are you taking to protect this information as best you can? And so forth and so on. So to give you an example of what a number of states have done, and this is truly international, what I'm about to show you, it's not just the US, as an example. So in social work, I mentioned that umbrella group, the umbrella group for all licensing boards in North America, the US, and Canada, to whom I was lecturing yesterday, a lot of licensing boards draw on what's called model regulatory standards. So the umbrella group in social work, the Association of Social Work Boards, and again in psychology, they have a different organization, mental health counseling, marriage and family therapy, they have their own. But in social work, it's the Association of Social Work Boards. And if you look at this document entitled Model Regulatory Standards for Technology and Social Work Practice, you will see that 12 years ago, see where I am down here? 2013, 12 years ago, ASWB appointed a task force to develop model regulatory standards, ethics informed, that have been adopted by many licensing boards around the world. I mean, I hear from social work regulators in various countries that have basically copied and pasted all or a portion of this document. Like, why start from scratch? And this task force spent also a year and a half. And the members included people from Wales and New Zealand and Ireland and Canada, get the point? And I was privileged to have been asked to chair this thing as well. So I've been involved very intimately in all three slices of this pie to develop so-called ethics standards, code of ethics standards related to the use of technology, so-called ethics informed practice standards, and so-called model regulatory standards pertaining to the use of technology. And I would argue that so many of these guidelines are applicable to the use of artificial intelligence. So we have a lot of tools to draw on. I think we need to be doing 10 things. At this point in the development of AI tools in behavioral health, and this is a moving target, or put a little differently, I feel like, I used to say we're building a boat in the middle of a rushing stream, not an easy thing to do, but I think that's too mild. I would say this stuff is coming at us so fast, it's hard for me to keep up, and I pay attention to these issues. I say this is more like building a ship the size of a cruise ship. You know how big those things are, 12 decks and multiple football fields in length. Trying to build one of those things in the middle of a stormy sea. Like, good luck with that. But here's my thinking today, that in the behavioral health professions, we ought to be trying to do 10 things. Any organization, any practitioner, number one, who's considering using AI or is actually using the shiny new toy, should have some overarching ethics-based governing principles. And I'll talk about what I think those principles ought to focus on momentarily. Is it fun to create these things? No. Is it time consuming? Yes. Can I think of a lot of other things I'd rather be doing with my time? Yes. But I think it's necessary. And I think any practitioner, any organization that uses AI and doesn't have any ethics-based governing principles, to use the lawyer language, exposes themselves to risk, legal risk, for negligence. Number two, if I were in charge, I would establish a so-called digital ethics steering committee, like colleagues where I work, to pay attention to our use of AI, right? If you're in private practice, that's a difficult thing to do, of course. And that's why peer consultation is so important. So important. Number three, I think we have to pay real close attention to diversity. I understand we are living in an era when there is an awful lot of political debate regarding this term, diverse, DEI. I get it. It is controversial, especially now. I get that. I think, my opinion, given the diversity of our clientele in behavioral health, we need to be sure that there's adequate representation when we confer with users, clients, members of the general public. Remember, not all users are clients, they're potential clients. You know, that tool I showed you, EarKick, I just showed you how to use it. I'm not a client. Anybody can use that at 2 in the morning or whatever. I think we ought to have focus groups that are truly representative by virtue of ethnicity and race and sexual orientation and gender expression and income and all the rest of it. I think that's the ethically responsible thing to do. Number four, there's that term algorithm. AI depends on algorithms. I think we have to subject these things to constructively critical peer review. Are they doing what they're designed to do, what they purport to do? Number five, before we actually, are ready for prime time, we ought to create simulations. Some of you know the term beta testing, BETA, beta testing. We better try these things out to see if there are any bugs, any glitches that we can identify. I think that's a responsible thing to do. It's time consuming. I get it. Number six, I would like to assemble a group of clinicians, not just users, but clinicians, to take a look at the results that the AI tools are generating. Like, does this make sense to us? Do we think these are valid, reliable sources that AI is drawing on? Because a lot of the AI tools, not all, but a lot of them actually insert citations, footnotes, which I think is a good thing. I tend to rely on AI tools that link the information to citations, footnotes, so that I can use my own judgment about whether they are credible sources. And I, ideally, would assemble a group of clinicians to take a look at the validity, the reliability, the trustworthiness of the results AI tools are generating. Number seven, because it's a shiny new toy, my opinion, I think we've got to provide training. I think anybody who's going to use this AI should not just like, oh, this sounds pretty cool, I'll start using it, but they ought to be responsible. And I hope this doesn't sound too pedantic. If it does, I apologize. But I think we have a duty to get some training. And again, back to my cross-examination by opposing counsel, any smart attorney, in my experience, who's challenging a behavioral health practitioner's use of AI, who wants to argue that it was used negligently, which is what they do sometimes, they're going to ask, what kind of training did you get? Show me the evidence that you got that training. And if the answer is, no, I just started using it, I think you got a problem. That's my experience. Number eight, I keep track of all of our efforts to identify what's going well, what's not going so well. I want the documentation. So if I ever get challenged, I can demonstrate my good faith effort to engage in true quality control, acknowledging there may be some problems, which inevitably there are. Number nine, I mentioned the possibility of algorithmic bias. I worry about that. I worry about, to use the term we're using in AI, hallucinations, right? The AI tool that like makes stuff up, misheard, referred to the client drinking a beer when the client said he's afraid of a bear, or maybe afraid of a bear that drinks beer. I don't know. That's a kind of a cute image, a bear drinking beer, right? But I worry about that possibility. And I think the responsible thing to do, number 10, is to monitor these developments. To me, this is not like one-stop shopping, that we have to periodically, wade back into the water to see how well these algorithms are working. We can't just check it today and assume it's going to be fine 6 months from now. So those are the 10 things I think we need to do. And there are, and I'm just going to give you a few examples of these, there are some organizations out there that are doing some great work to help people like us who are thinking about using AI or are using AI. I mean, if you decide by the end of our time together today that you're having nothing to do with this, then maybe these resources aren't that useful to you. I get that. But I bet some of you are like intrigued and seriously thinking about using some AI tools. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. One is sponsored by UNESCO. You've all heard of UNESCO, I imagine. You may not remember exactly what the acronym stands for. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. UNESCO, to its credit, has created something called the Global AI Ethics and Governance Observatory. It is not focused explicitly on behavioral health, but so much of what they're doing, I think, can be applied to behavioral health. I'll show it to you in just a moment. There's another impressive, in my opinion, international effort sponsored by what's called iOS. In some settings, it's called ISO because this is international. And so the language, the terminology is translated, it becomes ISO instead of iOS, but it's the same organization. The International Organization for Standardization, which has been around for decades. What's the iOS? It's not focused on behavioral health per se. That's not their mission. iOS for decades has tried to have nations adopt similar standards in the industrial world, the commerce world, right? Because it facilitates commerce, it facilitates trade. Well, the iOS now has a project focused on AI. And I think so much of what they've been doing is relevant to behavioral health, where, and I'll show it to you in a moment, they have been developing standards to enhance fairness for anybody who's using AI, right? Transparency, to be sure that anybody who uses it, including our clients, members of the general public, that they really understand how these algorithms work. Because the average person may have heard of artificial intelligence, but may not have, gone into the weeds on this and may not fully understand this. Ethical standards that promote, and this is ethics jargon, non-maleficence, translation, do no harm. Do the AI algorithms, the protocols, are they designed to minimize, prevent harm as best as we can? AI tools that are accountable. The developers are accountable, right? They promote privacy. They protect personal data to the greatest extent possible. They enhance, and this is the iOS's term, robustness. I love that term. What's that? Steps to try to prevent adversarial attacks, unexpected inputs, hacking, that kind of thing. And then I think the last item is particularly relevant to behavioral health. At least it reflects my values, and I'm guessing this reflects your values: inclusiveness. Making sure that the tools we use in behavioral health draw on diverse perspectives: race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender expression, income, socioeconomic status, and so forth. So let me just show you quickly the websites to which I refer, just so you know that they exist. So here should come up momentarily, I hope. Yep. So you should see at the top left of your screen, UNESCO. This is the international effort on artificial intelligence, the so-called Global AI Ethics and Governance Observatory. You know what? I'll put this in the chat in case any of you want to grab it, if you're really interested in this stuff.
It's
I'm
in the
not suggesting.
chat.
Oh, never mind. She beat me to it. Okay. So the Global AI Ethics and Governance Observatory, getting AI governance right, I'm quoting here, is one of the most consequential challenges of our time, calling for mutual learning based on the lessons and good practices emerging from the different jurisdictions around the world. The UNESCO's Global AI Ethics and Governance Observatory the aim is to provide a global resource for policymakers, regulators, academics, the private sector, including behavioral health, and civil society, a nice term, to find solutions to the most pressing challenges posed by artificial intelligence. And you can go down this rabbit hole. There are lots of links here. I'm not going to do it, but UNESCO has done a great job of collating a lot of this. Then there's that other organization I mentioned, excuse me, the International Organization of Standards, or in some translations, ISO. And if you go to their website, Building a Responsible AI, How to Manage the AI Ethics Debate. And if you read through this, which I won't in detail, you'll see that the purpose of this organization's efforts is to address ethical concerns related to the use of AI, to promote the responsible use of AI, to address issues of potential bias, problems with transparency, challenges related to privacy. And this is a great resource for any of you who might want to get into the weeds some. And you'll see this list. This is the list that I had on my PowerPoint slide right there. This is where I got it from. To show you what's happening around the United States. And I predict what I'm about to show you is going to be replicated in many states. So a couple of months ago, I received a call from a state official in the state of Utah. And I didn't know this person. His name is Zach Boyd. He's a Ph.D. in mathematics, faculty member at Brigham Young University in Utah. And he's on loan to state government. Why? Because, and I'll show you the website. Mary, let me know if it's not there. I hope everybody can see that. It says on the upper left, Utah, an official website. This is a government website. And notice what it says to the right of Utah, Office of Artificial Intelligence Policy. Utah has created a state agency whose mission is to strengthen people's trust in AI activities in Utah through data-driven policy, timely regulatory adjustments, innovation enabling, regulatory relief, yada, yada, yada. And the director, Zach Boyd, I'll show you, and I didn't know him before, but we ended up having lovely conversations. He contacted me to say, and also his associate head of research, Alice Schwartz, also called. We had long conversations. And these are people working for Utah state government to come up with reasonable, ethics-informed guidelines for anybody in Utah who's using AI. And you know what he said to me? He said, and we've done our research. We found that you, referring to me, that you have been writing a lot about this. We'd like to pick your brains because we are starting with behavioral health. So they're concerned about lots of sectors of the Utah economy. And I'm not suggesting you buy those shoes. I'm not promoting these ads. But you can see here, this is a press release. The Office of Artificial Intelligence, this is Utah, is concluding its current learning agenda on the use of AI in mental health in Utah and has made its recommendations to legislators regarding a number of ethical issues related to the use of AI in behavioral health in Utah. And that's why he and his colleague consulted with me. This is just one statewide effort to address these issues. And I predict what's happening in Utah will be replicated elsewhere. This is a sign of what's going on. Mary, let me just pause. Any questions you want me to address before I move on?
The one question was someone requesting that NASW code of ethics with your yellow highlights.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me grab that and put that. And there's no paywall here. The good news is you can just grab this thing and have fun with it. If your social life is kind of slow these days, I hope it's not. You can, let's see here. you can, let me grab this, read this Saturday night, tomorrow night, and let me put it in the chat. And Mary, can you confirm for me that it came through?
Yes, it did.
Okie doke. Sometimes technology behaves the way we want it to. Anything else, Mary?
That was it.
Okay. So let me continue. And again, feel free to share your thoughts, your opinions, even if they differ from mine, no problem. Any questions you have, resources that you'd like me to suggest, if you'd like. And Mary will share those later. Okay. So we've got, about 40 minutes or so. So let me move on. Those are examples of both international and statewide efforts to come up with ethics-informed guidelines and standards pertaining to the use of AI in behavioral health, as well as other sectors. So one of the things I've been focusing on of late is what I call an ethical impact statement. An ethical impact statement. I know this is jargon, sounds kind of academic. It is. But this is my current thinking, that any behavioral health organization, any provider, any clinician that's using AI should think about the ethical impact, not only the guidelines, but also the impact, right? And so here are the items that I think we ought to be addressing. I'm not going to read every word here. It's too tedious. We don't have the time. So I think we need to spell out, ideally, in a document, like what exactly are we doing with AI? Like, what's the point? What are the aims? And I know this is jargon. We ought to comment on what's called proportionality screening. Just apologize for the jargon. Our efforts to minimize harm, right? Do we really need the AI? Is there some alternative that's preferable, like involving human beings, right? Have we clearly spelled out the ways in which AI could lead to some irreversible and onerous results that are, really harmful to people? Are we thinking all this stuff through? Are the AI tools we're thinking about using, do they compromise human rights? The third bullet point, project governance. Like, who's involved in developing these AI tools? Who's overseeing all this? And again, I know there's a lot of political debate now around diversity, but I'm allowed to express my opinion. My opinion is that we have an ethical duty to have adequate, diverse representation in our efforts to develop AI tools. We ought to be thinking about adequate representation of gender, age, race, color, descent, language, religion, national origin, ethnic origin, social origin, economic or social condition, disability, sexual orientation, and so forth. The fourth bullet point, again, more jargon, sorry about that, multi-stakeholder governance, right? So when we think about the various users, actual or potential users of AI, which ones should be consulted? Not just clinicians, that's one stakeholder group, of course. Not just clients, that's another stakeholder group, but members of the general public who might use some of these AI tools. I think we need to draw on their knowledge, their expertise, their opinions. I realize this may sound idealistic, but I believe in ideals. An ethical impact statement, in my opinion, should also include keen attention to safety and security. We're all concerned about that in the modern digital era, I think, right? Is there a real threat that the AI generated data could be poisoned? That's not a nice word, but that's the word we use, or corrupted. Could the information provided on AI tools be manipulated in adverse ways that are not in our clients' or users' best interest? The second bullet point on this slide, have we taken adequate steps in our development of AI tools to promote true fairness? In other words, avoiding, preventing algorithmic bias, to avoid discrimination, to promote diversity. It's kind of self-explanatory. Sustainability, the third bullet point, what I find is that a lot of behavioral health practitioners, and I don't mean this critically, it's just a statement of fact, or I think it's fact, are not well informed about the environmental impact of AI. But if you read the literature on AI, you will find, as some of you probably know, that AI technology requires extensive raw material extraction to make those chips, right? The microchips, to process the data, transportation costs for all the equipment. Some of you may have read articles on websites or in some newspaper about the energy consumption, the amount of water, literally, the amount of water it takes to keep these facilities going. There's a huge environmental impact, carbon footprint. I'm not saying it's not worth it. I'm saying I think we need to think about this. It's one of the variables in the equation. A couple more elements of an ethical impact statement. I've said several times today that I think we need to be very concerned about privacy, data protection, and are there sufficient protocols in place to protect this information as much as possible? Who can access the data? Under what circumstances? Can it be subpoenaed? Answer, yes. I think it can be subpoenaed. If clients are involved in legal proceedings, child custody disputes, termination of parental rights proceedings, criminal court proceedings, divorces, workers' comp cases, where behavioral health clinicians' notes are subpoenaed sometimes. Human oversight and determination. So you'll recall, I hope, that a bit ago, I mentioned that phrase escalation protocol. Again, more jargon, escalation protocol. The question is, well, is there a way for human beings to be involved if the AI is not able to handle a risk that emerges with regard to a client, remember the public who's using the AI tool? Is there an escalation protocol incorporated into the tool that will, as quickly as possible, bring a human being into the mix? Human oversight and determination. And then finally, transparency, explainability, accountability, responsibility. This goes back to the informed consent issue. Do our clients, do members of the general public truly understand the potential benefits and the potential risks associated with the use of AI tools? And finally, awareness and literacy. There is so much jargon here. I don't particularly care for the jargon, but it's the jargon. And are we using language that people can understand if they're not familiar with all this? Awareness and literacy. So let me shift gears. We've got about a half hour. Standard of care. So I realize some of you, maybe many of you, maybe even all of you, are familiar with this term, but I want to say something about this because I think it is so relevant to the discussion we're having today. So let me back up a bit. The standard of care concept in US law, it originates in England over a century ago. It finds its way into the United States law over a century ago in a very prominent court case called Coombs versus Bede. COOMBS versus Bede, BEEDE. This case originates in the state of Maine, not too far from where I am in Rhode Island. And the case goes to the Supreme Court. What's really important to note about Coombs versus Bede, which went to the Supreme Court in the 1890s, is that that case had nothing to do with what today we call behavioral health, had nothing to do with mental health counseling, zero. It almost sounds like the beginning of a joke, but it's not a joke. This case involved a dispute between an architect and the architect's client. And even though we're not talking about architecture today, even though you folks aren't architects, I'd assume, I believe so strongly that the implications of this Supreme Court ruling in Coombs versus Bede has everything to do with behavioral health and our use of artificial intelligence. So let me explain my thinking. And it goes like this. In Coombs versus Bede, there was a dispute between an architect, Coombs, and his client, the Bede family. According to the record, the Bede family hired Coombs, the architect, to design plans for a house in Lewiston, Maine. And according to the record, the Bede family gave architect Coombs a list of this is what we're looking for, here are the design features, and here's our budget. So whatever you come up with, please know this is our budget. This is what we can afford. And according to the record, architect Coombs did what architects do and produced the plans, the blueprints, all that. And according to the record, the Bede family, particularly Dad, sorry about the chauvinism, concluded they could not do the construction within budget. If they were to do what the architect suggested, they could not afford it. So Clarence Bede is not happy, and he refuses to pay the architect's bill. This case has to do with a fee dispute. That can happen in any sector, of course. You take your car to a mechanic in Coeur d'Alene, you take it back, you pay the auto mechanic, and it's still got problems, making all these noises, and you're upset. You need to fix this, I already paid, it's a fee dispute. So what happened in this case, which is why it went to the Supreme Court, is that the question before the court had less to do with architecture, and it had to do with the relationship between any professional and the professional client or patient. And that is why I believe Coombs versus Bede is directly, not indirectly, directly relevant to behavioral health and by extension, our use of artificial intelligence, if we choose to do that. And here's what the court said. I mean, I can just about recite the court ruling from the 1890s, but I'll paraphrase it for you. Here's what the court said. Whenever there is a question before the court about what any professional should have done in any particular situation, and it says in the court ruling, it could be a doctor, it could be a lawyer, and it lists a bunch of professionals, doesn't list mental health counseling or social work, but it lists a bunch of professions. The court said, this ruling is not about architecture. This is a ruling about the relationship between any professional and that professional's client or patient. And what the court said is the measuring rod is this concept of standard of care. So let me say a little bit about this, but let's apply it to artificial intelligence. What the court said is whenever there's a question about what let's use our example, behavioral health professional did that's in dispute, and I told you there is litigation right now related to the use of artificial intelligence. The question before the court always has to do with standard of care. And I will tell you this, as somebody who spends an enormous amount of his time as an expert witness in litigation and licensing board cases, I mean, I literally have 7 of these going on right now. When we hop off of this call today, I got to spend my afternoon reading depositions in a case involving a suicide, where there's a lawsuit. But anyway, so I review lots of records, clinical records, progress notes, what we call ESI, electronically stored information, text messages, online posts. I review everything. That's what the lawyers send me. And the question they always, always, always ask, 100% of the time, not 98, not 99, 100% of the time, Dr. Reamer, now that you've had an opportunity to review the evidence in this matter, in your opinion, did the fill in the blank, mental health counselor, marriage and family therapist, social worker, psychologist, psychiatrist, meet the standard of care regarding whatever the issue is, or fall below the standard of care? I always get that question. That's the measuring rod. And this sentence has 3 clauses in it. The first clause, I'm asked to opine. That's the verb lawyers use. Opine, like opinion. I have to say whether I think the behavioral health practitioner, regarding whatever the issue is, an allegation of a confidentiality breach, an allegation that an Idaho practitioner mismanaged boundaries in dual relationships, an allegation that an Idaho practitioner didn't get adequate informed consent before providing telebehavioral health services. Whatever the issue is, was that practitioner reasonable and prudent? Well, notice the prefix of the word reason, R-E-A-S-O-N, suffix able. What the court said is there has got to be evidence that the practitioner, whether it's a doctor, a nurse, and I would insert a counselor, a social worker, did they think it through? So with regard to today's discussion, if a question emerges in a lawsuit or a licensing board complaint about a practitioner's use of artificial intelligence, and I'm asked to be the expert witness, I'm going to be looking for evidence that the practitioner thought through the ethical use and responsible use of AI. Was that person reasonable? Was that practitioner prudent? What does the word prudent mean? Look it up in the dictionary. You'll typically see the words careful and cautious. What does that mean? Did the practitioner study ethics-informed guidelines for the use of AI? Take continuing ed webinars like this before using it? Did they look at code of ethics standards? Did they look at regulatory standards? Did they look at ethics-informed practice standards? The three slices of the pie. Were they careful? Were they cautious? Or were they simply drawn to the shiny new toy and they started generating their clinical notes using AI, but they didn't take the deep dive into the potential risks? The second clause in this sentence, and if you look in statutory definitions of standard of care around the United States, you will see language along these lines. Maybe not these exact words, but pretty darn close. The second clause, with the same or similar training. So one of the things we know, excuse me, is that today here, gathered among you, and there are over 100 of you, we've got people with different training, different education. We've got mental health counselors, marriage and family therapists, psychologists, social workers, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the training is, while similar in some respects, there are some noteworthy differences. The ethical standards are similar, but there are some noteworthy differences. The regulatory standards are similar, but there are some noteworthy differences. And so, under the rules established in the late 1800s, courts factor in the nature of your training, the nature of your education. And when I'm brought in as an expert witness, I'm supposed to factor that in to my opinion. The third clause, should have done under the same or similar circumstances. So if you think about the multiple ways in which AI is being used in behavioral health, is likely to be used in behavioral health based on the trends, then I think we have to turn up the power on the microscope with regard to the circumstances. So what circumstances are we talking about? Are we talking about an AI tool meant for clients? Well, that establishes a legal duty that's different from any kind of legal duty that might be associated with an AI tool for the general public who's not a client. That's a unique circumstance. An AI tool that's being used to provide feedback for clinical supervision is a unique circumstance. That's different from an AI tool that's being used to generate clinical notes. And that's different from an AI tool that offers people a chatbot like EarKick, when they can simply type in at 2 a.m, I'm having a hard time sleeping, I have so much anxiety, all I think about is the political divisiveness in our country, plus stuff going on in my family. That's a chatbot. And you see how quickly you get a response. That's a unique circumstance. So I think this concept of standard of care is so profoundly important. First, how do we think through carefully, cautiously, our use of AI tools? Second, what are the expectations if I'm a social worker, a mental health counselor, a marriage and family therapist, a psychologist, psychiatrist, psychiatric nurse? What are the standards in my profession? Because those are going to be introduced as evidence in my experience. And some lawyers going to argue that you should have consulted those before using the AI tools. They're going to ask you questions about that under oath, particularly during cross-examination. They're going to ask for evidence that you actually did what you say you did. And in litigation and in licensing board cases, the unique circumstances, the third clause, I think will be quite relevant. So I argue in some of my work that there is a very important distinction between what I call the substantive and procedural standard of care. You'll see my reference there to the book that I wrote a couple of years ago on risk management in the behavioral health professions. And in that book, I have an in-depth discussion of this distinction. Substantive standard of care. In behavioral health, I argue there are certain substantive standards of care, what reasonable and prudent practitioners with your kind of training should be doing in unique circumstances. For example, if a client is engaging in suicidal ideation, we know what a reasonable and prudent practitioner ought to do to assess suicide risk, to develop a suicide risk management plan, that the standards, in my opinion, have moved away from safety contracts. This is the stuff I have to testify about. We know that there are substantive standards of care. If a client reports that he, she, or they abused their child violently, Idaho has mandatory reporting statutes. There's a substantive standard of care regarding disclosure of confidential information without client consent to protect that child from harm, or an older adult, or a person with a disability. That's a substantive standard of care. It's not easy to comply with those, but they're out there. And I could rattle off a whole bunch of clear substantive standards of care. But I argue in my book on risk management that there are so many instances in behavioral health, my opinion, where there are no clear substantive standards of care. There are none. What there are differences of opinion, thoughtful differences of opinion, reasonable differences of opinion among seasoned behavioral practitioners. And I'll give you some examples before I apply this to AI. In Idaho, if you're a practitioner who's in recovery and you, for years, have been going to a 12-step meeting for your own benefit, fine. And you have a new client who, whoa, what a surprise, shows up at that same 12-step meeting. Now you have a boundary issue. You've got to decide whether to stay, whether to leave, to avoid the dual relationship. If you stay, do you share in front of your client? I know for a fact, and I think this is a fact, one of my books on boundary issues has a whole section on this issue, that we disagree among ourselves about the best way to handle that. That, in my opinion, there is no crystal clear substantive standard of care. Here's another example before I apply this to AI. I often testify in cases as an expert witness where some of the evidence that's being used against the clinician, right? The complaint was filed by what's now the former client because the relationship ruptured for whatever reason. There's an allegation that the clinician disclosed personal information about the clinician's own personal life, which according to the client muddied the boundaries. The client says, I became confused about a relationship. Was this more like a friendship? Because my therapist is telling me all about some of her childhood trauma and how it's related to my childhood trauma and his recovery and how that's related to my, and the boundaries get blurred. And I've written a lot about self-disclosure. And in my experience, there is no crystal clear substantive standard of care about the ethics of self-disclosure. Some of us are comfortable self-disclosing for therapeutic purposes. Others of us aren't. I think it's not black and white. I think it's not only gray. I think there are multiple shades of gray with regard to so many of these issues. Should I accept a gift from a client or not accept a gift? My client's invited me to her wedding. She says the only reason she's able to enter into this relationship is because of the terrific therapy I provided. She wants me at the wedding. Do you go? Do you not go? I know there's disagreement about these things. So I argue that when there's no consensus regarding what I call the substantive standard of care, then what we ought to do, and I think this is really practical, not just academic, but practical risk management advice, is to shift the lens and to focus instead on what I call the procedural standard of care. And I think this is directly relevant to the use of AI, because in my opinion, at this juncture, maybe it'll change in the future, although I kind of doubt it, I do not think there are substantive standards of care around the use of AI. What I think there is a lot of debate, a lot of variation in opinion. And so that if you were to ask behavioral health practitioners, is there a clear standard of care that all clinicians agree to with regard to the reasonable and prudent use of AI? I'd say, nope, it doesn't exist. Opinions are emerging, evolving. This is relatively new. So I would argue that there are 8 things we can do. And I really think this is practical advice, not just pie in the sky advice. And I say this as somebody who specializes in risk management. I don't want practitioners to be sued. I don't want them to be named in licensing board complaints. And if they are, I want them to have evidence. They dotted the I's and crossed the T's. So 8 things. If I'm thinking about using AI, number 1, I'm getting consultation. From colleagues, that's horizontal. And if I work for an organization like a behavioral health center, mental health agency, hospital, school, whatever, supervision is vertical. I'm getting consultation and supervision, and I am documenting the fact that I did it. Because I don't want some lawyer to say, you didn't document it, it didn't happen. That's what we learn in law school at the University of Idaho. I want documentation. It shows a good faith effort on my part to do this in a reasonable and prudent fashion. Number 2, I want documentation that I reviewed ethical standards in my profession, whether it's mental health counseling, marriage and family therapy, psychology, social work, whatever it is. I want to take a look, if it's in social work, at the yellow, so to speak, the comparable guidelines applicable to technology in my respective code of ethics. It shows a good faith effort. There may not be consensus on the implications of that language, but the fact that I consulted the code, the fact that I documented it, adds, in my experience, a thick, thick, thick layer of insulation and protection. Number 3, relevant national practice standards. That document that I showed you, the social work example, that was produced by the task force that I chaired, sponsored by the 4 organizations. Those are national ethics-informed practice standards related to the use of technology. As I said, those things get introduced as evidence. If I'm going to be cross-examined by an attorney who's trying to challenge my thinking, I want documentation that I actually looked at that thing, that I know it exists, I actually looked at it, took it into account. That really, really helps. Number 4, taking the time, and I know this is tedious and onerous, to review relevant laws and policies and regulations. For those of you in Idaho, which is most of you, if not all of you, what do the Idaho licensing statutes say? What do the Idaho regulations say? To which you are held as a behavioral health practitioner. And then, of course, there's the federal stuff. HIPAA, which applies to almost everybody. If you work in a school, as some of you do, it's FERPA, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, Title 34, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 99. HIPAA is typically irrelevant in a school setting, usually. And I know we have a few people here who specialize in substance use disorder treatment. If you are a substance use disorder treatment and you work in a setting that gets any kind of federal assistance, you probably fall under Title 42, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 2. And that is much stricter than HIPAA, much stricter than FERPA. And if you're using AI in a substance use disorder treatment program that falls under Title 42, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 2, I'm taking a look at that document with regard to the implications for the use of AI and the protection of confidential information associated with AI. That law, and it's incredibly strict, and I imagine some of you are familiar with it, it's incredibly strict. And now it's being applied to the use of AI by substance use disorder treatment providers. Number 5, relevant literature. If we had been having this discussion a year ago, I could not have identified prominent literature pertaining to the use of AI. If we had had this discussion 6 months ago, some of it was just emerging. But now there's stuff out there. And some of it I've written, some of it other people have written. And I'm telling you this, lawyers are going to find it. They're going to find things like, this is my new book on this, which just got released a week ago, literally a week ago. Artificial intelligence in the behavioral health professions, ethical and risk management issues. 6 months ago, this didn't exist. A month ago, this didn't exist. Lawyers find this stuff and they read it. And if they find content that is directly related to the litigation or the licensing board case, that's on their side of the case. In other words, commentary that supports their legal theory, they're going to introduce it as evidence. It can be used on the plaintiff side. It can be used on the defense side. It can be used by a prosecutor in a licensing board case. Literature matters, particularly if it's peer-reviewed. If it's self-published stuff, they don't care. They're not going to use it. The gold standard is peer-reviewed. And they'll cherry pick. They will cherry pick sentences, paragraphs, pages, sections, and they'll put it up on the screen to support their theory of the case as part of the standard of care. Number 6, if I'm using or thinking about using AI, I'm talking to a lawyer. And I hesitate to say this because I suspect some of you are like, do I really need to consult a lawyer? And I'm telling you, well, my opinion is yes, because there are significant legal issues here. Issues around privacy, compliance with Idaho law, compliance with federal law, HIPAA, FERPA, 42 CFR Part 2. If any of you work for the VA in Boise, the VA has regulations that you need to comply with if you're using AI. And the VA is using a lot of AI, by the way. I need to talk to a lawyer about compliance with statutes, compliance with regulations. I need to be thinking about language to include informed consent protocols. I need to think about disclaimers that I'm putting on the website regarding the potential benefits and risks associated with the use of AI. And those disclaimers better be worded really carefully, which is why I think we need to consult with a lawyer. You know, I get it. People are not like inclined to like spend a lot of time with lawyers, you know, and pay them. I get that. I get that. But I work with lawyers who are remarkably smart and remarkably well informed. And I will tell you this, in recent months, there are lawyers who are specializing in these issues. I could pull up websites. A year ago, I didn't see much of this. There are now lawyers who are specializing in risk management in behavioral health associated with the use of AI. And I'm spending the money to consult with them for 2 reasons. One is to get their advice. They may think of issues I hadn't thought of. And the other is, if anybody ever raises questions about my use of AI, then I can say I was not a solo pilot. I actually took the time to get legal consultation. And just the fact that you got legal consultation, not from your sister-in-law, who is a terrific criminal defense attorney who's going to give you free legal advice. She may be a great criminal defense attorney, but she doesn't specialize in this. I'm going to an attorney who specializes in this. That, too, adds a thick layer of protection. Lawyers have a phrase called reasonable reliance. If you went to the right kind of lawyer with the right kind of expertise, you relied on that lawyer's advice, even if it turns out to be advice that wasn't so great, that helps to protect you under the doctrine of reasonable reliance. If you work in a hospital, there's a pretty good chance you have access to an ethics committee. Number 7, I'm running this by an ethics committee. They probably are not going to tell you what to do, but they can help you think this through. If you're a member of a professional association like NASW, APA, ACA, AMFT, you may be able to get some free ethics consultation as a member benefit. In social work, there's an 800 number for ethics consultation, an 800 number sponsored by what's called the Office of Ethics and Professional Review. They can talk to you, but if you're not a member, they're not going to talk to you. It's a member benefit. And as I've said multiple times today, documentation, 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 because I don't want some lawyer saying, well, you say you did all this stuff, but show me the evidence. Because if it's not written, It did not happen, which is not true, of course, but I don't want to have to climb that hill. I don't want to have to climb that hill. Let me make a couple of other comments briefly and then turn it back over to Mary for other questions or comments. I'm just going to show you these slides quickly. Lawsuits and licensing board complaints cases have different standards. If it's a lawsuit, the plaintiff, the party bringing the suit, must show evidence that your use of AI satisfies 4 conditions. That you had a duty to the client or the general public. You breached the duty by omission or commission. You didn't have proper informed consent standards. You didn't have proper disclaimers, and all that sort of thing. That your use of AI caused harm, and that there's a causal connection between your use of AI and the harm, the emotional harm, what have you. What lawyers call proximate cause or cause. In fact, this is the standard framework in a lawsuit. But if it's a licensing board complaint, licensing boards do not need evidence of harm. In a lawsuit, you have to have it. But it could be the same set of facts. If it goes to a licensing board, all a licensing board needs is evidence that your use of AI did not comply with standards adopted by that licensing board, even if there's no evidence of harm. Completely different. Lawyers use fancy language like acts of misfeasance and malfeasance and nonfeasance and acts of commission and acts of omission. And all of this is applicable to the use of AI. Here are 2 examples of lawsuits that have been filed associated with the use of AI and suicide. On the left-hand side from NBC News, lawsuit claims Character.ai is responsible for a teen suicide. The mom says the company's chatbots encouraged her 14-year-old son to take his own life, according to the lawsuit. This is AI. On the right-hand side, Washington Post. An AI companion suggested he kill his parents. Now his mom is suing. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg. On this slide, I'm not going to go through this. We don't have the time. If it's a licensing board case, and I predict we're going to be seeing some of this with regard to AI, licensing boards have lots of options. If they think a practitioner did not use AI responsibly, you can kind of skim that list. This is what I'm seeing. And finally, I strongly suggest that if you haven't looked at your malpractice insurance recently, take a close look at it. Call your insurer to be sure you have adequate coverage. You don't need to increase it. That if you're going to use AI, that your policy covers your use of AI, because I've seen problems. And especially for those of you not in private practice. And I could give you a half-hour speech on this, but for the reasons you see listed here in the first bullet point, if you work for a school, if you work for a mental health behavioral health agency, if you work for a hospital, I beg of you, my opinion, do not rely entirely on your employer's malpractice coverage. Get your own policy. I beg of you, because for the reasons listed here, your employer's policy may not cover you. You need your own as backup. That's my opinion. And then I've got a bunch of resources here if any of you are inclined to read more about this stuff. So, Mary, what do you have?
There was one question, and it was, did you mention coordination of care? If a client is accessing an AI tool, are we able to gain access to that with an ROI?
So it's hard for me to provide a one-size-fits-all answer, and it depends on the AI company. So, for example, I'll give you a hypothetical. Your client accesses EarKick. EarKick, maybe you don't sponsor it, but you have a client who says, oh, I got all this advice from EarKick or one of the other chatbots, Wobot, Wiza, Pixel, whatever. And the client, you say, the client, well, would it be okay with you if I read the exchange? And the client says, sure. I cannot guarantee that those companies are going to provide you, therapists, with access to that exchange. I would not assume that they're going to do that. And then maybe some of them will. I can't speak for all of them, but I would not assume that you will be able to get access to that. It may be that your client would have to pull up that exchange, print it out, and bring it to you, or put it in a Word document and send it to you electronically. You may not be able to get it directly from the company.
That is the only question that I had
Okay.
in that
Okay.
section. Oh my goodness, Dr. Reamer, thank you so much. What a wonderful information-packed presentation.
I
And
hope so.
I'm sure that the PDF and the recording will be well visited. So everyone, I will send an email in the next hour or so. I have to wait for Zoom to generate the attendance report, and I'll send the survey link, but it is in the chat right now. And check your confirmation email for full CEU requirements. And you've got until Tuesday at 2:30. That's when it closes. Direct questions to our email, Empower Idaho at Gmail. Well, oh my gosh, I can't even think of it right now.
It's
That's
all right.
Empower Idaho at janice.org. Sorry, I had a little problem there.
Don't use
And
Gmail and Janice.org. Don't use Gmail. Wrong place.
and the slides and recording will be available on the website in a couple of days. Thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Dr. Reamer. It was
Fine.
wonderful.
My pleasure. If I can take 30 seconds, right?
Go.
So, I want to say thank you, Mary, and your colleagues for inviting me to join you. It's nice to be back in Idaho, air quotes, because I'm not there. I'm in Rhode Island. But having had some wonderful experiences in Idaho, it's nice to be back there. I remember when my kids were little, I brought them back that fake candy potato, that you get at the airport, because that's what you get in Idaho, the fake candy potato. Right. They love that. Yeah. Anyway, lots of fond memories there. And I said at the start, I realize people log into these things with varying degrees of enthusiasm. And I'll ask the rhetorical question, since I can't see all of you. How many of you are logging off thinking really differently about AI, its role in behavioral health? You're aware of uses that you didn't know of when we logged on today, ethical issues. And I understand, mandatory continuing ed is not exactly fun, but I hope this has been useful. I hope it's stretched your brains. I hope it hasn't raised your blood pressure. I hope it's just been thought provoking. And even if you don't want to use AI, I hope you agree with me. We have got to know what's going on out there. We've just got to know what's going on out there. It is a big, complicated world, and this is part of it. So thank you for joining in. Thank you for being behavioral health professionals. I mean this sincerely. I don't know of a time in my lifetime when there has been a greater need for behavioral health, given what's going on in our world, internationally, nationally, maybe in Idaho. Oh my gosh. And the world needs us. And so thank you for doing the work you do. And again, Mary, thank you for your hard work. Be well, everybody. Oh, and if you're in Rhode Island, stop by. I assume most of you are going to show up in Rhode Island for something, right? Like, who doesn't show up in Rhode Island? Stop by. Take care.
Exactly. Bye. Thank you, Dr. Reamer. Bye,
Be well.
everyone. Have a good day.